Good morning, and welcome to the April 9th, 2024 Planning Commission regular meeting. I am Blaney Miller, Chair of the Commission. We have a very full agenda today, so I would ask that everyone please be efficient in your comments and avoid redundancy so that we can hear from as many viewpoints on as many cases as possible today. We start every meeting with an opportunity for the public to comment on an item not contained on the agenda. Are there any members of the public who'd like to speak on an item not on the agenda today? Seeing none, we'll move to the consent agenda. There are 2 items on consent today. Both of these applicants have requested that their cases be deferred until our April 25th meeting. Do I have a motion to approve these 2 items on consent?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. And moving on to committee reports, we have 1 item, the Affordable Housing Location Policy discussion. This item was just a review of the existing affordable housing location policy, and no action was recommended or taken. I'd like to thank staff and the committee for the interesting and helpful presentation and discussion on these items. So since no action was recommended without objection, I would like to move forward with no action on this item. And yes.
I'm sorry, on the second item on the consent agenda, did you mean to defer to May 14?
Excuse
as
me?
recommended?
I did, excuse me. So we need to amend that motion? Well, I guess the motion was just to approve the consent agenda, right? So that was as recommended for that clarification. We're good? Okay. Pardon me for that mistake. Moving on to old business, there's 1 item on the agenda today, rezoning case Z6223 at Harper Road. This case was discussed at our March 12th meeting and deferred to allow for additional zoning conditions to be amended. I would ask staff for a presentation focusing on those changes since our last meeting.
Good morning, Hannah Reckow, Planning and Development. As was just said, this case is Z6223. It was deferred for revised conditions. The applicant has submitted unsigned revised conditions, but has not submitted a signed copy. So I believe that can't be considered at this meeting. It's also my understanding that the applicant wishes to defer discussion to a future meeting.
Okay, thank you. Our next regular meeting is on April 23rd. Those signed conditions would have to be submitted by this Friday in order to be considered at that meeting. And I believe that that would be enough time. So without objection, I would like to make a motion to defer this item to our April 23rd meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
Do we, all those in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. That motion passes unanimously. Moving on to new business, these requests have not appeared on a previous Planning Commission agenda, and we will hear a full staff presentation and applicant presentation, and we will hear from the public. The first item is zoning case Z6023 at Tryon Road. This case is to change approximately 6.61 acres from IX3 parking limited with special residential parking overlay district and special highway overlay district 1 to CX5 with conditions and the special residential parking overlay district. And then we will now turn to staff for a presentation from the city.
Sure, yeah. So this is case Z6023. It's 1 parcel, 4020 Tryon Road, a little over 6.5 acres. The request is to rezone from industrial mixed use 3 stories parking limited with a special residential parking overlay district and a special highway overlay district 1. The request is to rezone to commercial mixed use 5 stories with conditions and to remove the SHOD 1 overlay. So this is an area between Tryon Road and I-40. There's a mix of mixed use, largely industrial, light industrial, and residential in the surrounding area. You can see sort of a larger aerial of where this is at the corner of Lake Dam Road and Tryon Road. As I said, there's a mix of sort of light industrial uses and low and moderate scale residential in this area. Closer up of the site, you can see most of the frontage is on Lake Dam Road. There is a little bit of frontage on Tryon Road. Mainly undeveloped, there is sort of a surface parking lot near the Lake Dam Road frontage. Some views of what that looks like from both of those frontages. Some proposed zoning conditions include prohibiting uses normally allowed in CX, providing a maximum number of residential units on the site and a maximum amount of non-residential uses, and then applying the standards of the parking limited frontage along one of the property's frontage on Lake Dam Road. And there's a few conditions requiring additional landscape buffers. So one is on the northern boundary adjacent to I-40, an area of average of 10 feet. So this is the area that the Shad 1 yard would have applied to, and that's, for comparison, a 50-foot width area. And then there's another landscape buffer that would be required along the Lake Dam Road frontage as well. And then finally, there's a zoning condition that was requiring 13 of the dwelling units on the site to be made affordable for households earning 80% area median income for at least 30 years. So the existing to proposed here, they're both mixed use districts. There's the removal of the Shad 1 yard, removal of restrictions on ground floor residential NIX, an increase in the maximum building height. So that's increasing residential entitlement, and then the zoning condition that is capping non-residential use is really sort of a down zoning in commercial uses. So this site has a lower walk, transit, and bike score than average for the city, about average proximity to jobs. It does add potential units to the housing supply. Up to 13 of those are subsidized units, and the variety of housing types and units and lots that are permitted are smaller than average. But the site is not within walking distance of transit. For demographics, this census tract is, residents are less likely to be racial minorities compared with the city overall, about similarly likely to be low income, but it's worth noting that this census tract is mainly industrial uses, and there's relatively few dwelling units in it currently, and that's likely shaping kind of the data we can get on it. Future land use map designation here is community mixed use. The requested district CX5 CU is consistent with that designation. And there are a few urban form designations here, including urban thoroughfare along Tryon Road. That is wanting to see a urban or hybrid frontage along there, and there is a condition sort of applying that to one side, though strictly speaking, it's not along the recommended corridor. So for that reason, it is inconsistent with the urban form map. But the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan overall. Consistent policies touch on compact development, so the mix of uses in this area, as well as the increase of potential dwelling units. And then inconsistent policies, these are really all touching on the frontage topic and sort of the pedestrian friendliness of that, the site towards Tryon Road. So that is the staff summary. Your deadline for action is in May, and I'm happy to answer any other questions you have.
Thank you very much. Moving on to public comment for those in support. The applicant and those in favor will have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Morning, Chair Miller and members of the Planning Commission. I'm Mark Frederick with Parker Poe, Adams & Bernstein at 301 Fayetteville Street. I'm here on behalf of the applicant, Elmington Capital. This is a fairly straightforward request to transition this site away from its current industrial zoning to allow multifamily development along the Tryon Road corridor. The site is ideally situated just north of Tryon Road, near the interchange of Gorman Street and Interstate 40, as well as near the crossroads area just to the west. But the property has been sitting vacant for about 10 years. There's been a little bit of interest in it, but it's been sitting vacant which is a little surprising with its ideal location with access to 40 and the community services in the surrounding area. You can also see that the surrounding area is primarily residential in character, with a mix of townhomes, single-family detached, and some apartment communities to the east along Tryon Road. So the rezoning of the site, although it's industrial mixed use, we are proposing a CX5 zoning that is more in line with the character of the area. And we have proposed a variety of zoning conditions to address both site-specific constraints, as well as to make sure that any development is compatible with the site itself and the surrounding area. This includes a maximum amount of residential units at 250 and a max amount of non-residential uses at 15,000 square feet. You'll also notice that we have included a commitment to providing workforce housing units. Elmington Capital, this is their first project in Raleigh, but they do have a number of successful projects in the Southeast with a focus on providing workforce housing and investing in the communities that they're building in. So for this project, we're including 13 units at 80% AMI for a minimum of 30 years. This is approximately just over 5% of the maximum entitlement, although that percentage will likely increase as the final determination on the amount of units is laid out with the site plans following rezoning. So we've also provided a few conditions to address, again, those site-specific constraints. The amount of frontage on Tryon Road is rather limited. So for site layout purposes, we only applied the parking limited frontage along that Lake Dam Road frontage to be as consistent with the urban form map as possible. And then also we are proposing to remove the special highway overlay district, primarily because of some constraints along that northern boundary with a sewer easement, and also with the natural amount of buffering that is currently to the north of the site. So we included some landscape buffering conditions, but I'd like to touch on just the existing conditions real quick. So the view on the top left is from 40 looking into the site, and then the top right is from the site looking at 40. And then we've included a cross section looking at, going from the interchange up, or from 40 up to the rezoning site to the plan right here. You'll see that there's about 150 feet between the highway and the site, as well as about 22 feet in topography change there that will provide a substantial amount of natural buffering. And you'll also see on the aerial that a lot of that vegetation along the highway is within the NCDOT right-of-way, so it will not be disturbed by this project. But in addition to this noise buffering, we've also included a 10-foot landscape buffer along that northern boundary to include 5 canopy trees, 3 understory trees, 40 evergreen shrubs per 100 linear feet. This will be in addition to that existing vegetation. And I'll also note that this is more dense than any of the transition yards in the UDO. And then we also proposed a landscape buffer along Lake Dam Road to address some of that noise attenuation. So per 100 feet, we'll include 2 canopy trees, 1 understory tree, and 10 shrubs, as well as 20 ornamental shrubs. This would be within the rezoning site, but we are dealing with some constraints here. And I'll go back to the aerial real quick to show you that. So the right-of-way actually extends into the site for the majority of the Lake Dam Road frontage. So that's about 40 feet from the back of curb that we wouldn't necessarily be able to plant in other than street trees. So what we've proposed is this additional landscaping within our site, but also an increase to those standards We're proposing an additional 3 understory trees within that right-of-way, just because if we extend it into the site, we're really limiting the developable area. So we won't really want to use that area between the property and the road. So we propose additional landscaping there, subject to NCDOT approval, although we don't anticipate any issues there. And lastly, this case is consistent with the future land use map and the comprehensive plan as a whole. The site is currently zoned for industrial uses, but the comprehensive plan really envisions a more mixed-use center with a mix of commercial and residential uses. So the proposed CX5 zoning directly conforms to those recommendations. It's also consistent with three comprehensive plan vision themes related to managing our growth, expanding housing choices, and coordinating land use and transportation. So in addition to replacing that industrial zoning with something that is more appropriate, this project will add to the housing stock as well as additional workforce housing units in an ideal location with access to 40. We're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak in support of this project? In that case, moving on to the public comment for any opposed. Those opposed to this case will have a total of 10 minutes to speak. Please come to the podium. And seeing none, we will bring the discussion back to the table. Would anyone like to start with questions or comments from the commission? Commissioner Peeler.
Yeah, so thank you to the applicant for including, the tree areas you've included and the affordable housing. I appreciate those conditions, thoughtful stuff. But I have a question for staff. I was looking on IMAPs at this site, and it does appear to have a section of it that's flood-prone soils. And then in the staff report, it looked like it said there were no flood hazards or no flood-prone soils. So I was just curious about that differentiation. I may be looking at something wrong or misreading it, but just curious.
I am looking at that as we speak. I believe that it is that not all of the flood-prone soils that appear on IMAPs are flood-prone soils per the UDO. So there is a small number that are actually not regulated by the city.
Gotcha. How do we tell the difference by looking at any of this?
So if you click on them in IMAPs to identify which type of soil it is, then you can compare it to the list in the UDO. The GIS in IMAPs is based on the county's regulations rather than the city's regulations, which is why there's that discrepancy.
So the one I'm referring to in IMAPs is just the plain flood-prone soil section where it only has one type. That's what shows up on mine. In flood hazard areas, there are a few different ones, but I don't see that come up on
Yeah, it's, I'm having a problem where the text is black on a black background, so I can't actually read which type it is. Thank you. So this is, when you click, if you click on it, it'll give you more characteristics of it, and this is Coliflex, sandy loam, which is not one of the soils that is regulated by the city. So that is the difference. We understand that it's confusing, and we continue to work with the county GIS folks on making the maps clearer.
Got it. And I guess second part of that is, right across Tryon from here is the Swift Creek Overlay District, Swift Creek Protection Overlay District. And I just didn't see much in the report about that. So I'm curious what, this being on high ground too, and a lot, basically everything south of Tryon being sort of downstream and in a watershed protection overlay district.
Yeah, in this area, Tryon Road is the watershed divide.
Mm-hmm.
So the properties south of Tryon Road drain into the Swift Creek watershed, and the properties north of Tryon Road, including this one, drain into the Walnut Creek watershed. So this property does not have the additional requirements of the Swift Creek watershed protection overlay.
Got it. So everything north of Tryon drains north?
Not everything, but in this particular section, that's the case. It's more or less the boundary. It squiggles back and forth across the road.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions from commissioners? None from our landscape team. Okay. Yes?
Ready to
Commissioner
move
Otto.
to
Okay,
approve.
so I'd like to entertain a motion.
Yeah. Move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated April 9th, 2024, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment.
Thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion is second. Those in favor? Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Moving on to our next case. Item F2, rezoning case Z6123 at Spring Forest Road. This case is to change approximately 1.56 acres from R10 with conditions to RX3 with conditions. We will now turn to Bronwyn Reedus for a presentation from City Planning staff.
Thanks. Good morning. Bronwyn Reedus with Planning and Development. This is rezoning case Z6123. Request to rezone about a little over an acre and a half from residential 10 with conditions to residential mixed use 3 stories with conditions. Your deadline for action is May 25th. So this site is located just south of Spring Forest Road. It is a little bit west of the intersection of Spring Forest Road and Atlantic Avenue. Zoning in the area is mainly residential to the west and south, and then mixed use, commercial mixed use to the east. Here's an aerial image of the site in the surrounding area. You can see it's just across Spring Forest Road from Millbrook High School. I'll point out too, further west along Spring Forest Road is the Millbrook Exchange Park. You can see that moderate scale residential built out to the west of the site, and then the commercial built out to the east. Here are some views of the site, from first one being north facing on Timber Ridge Drive, the second being southeast facing on Spring Forest Road. The applicant has proposed 2 conditions, the first prohibiting some uses, including boarding house, dormitory, fraternity, sorority house, telecommunications tower, bed and breakfast, hospitality house, eating establishment, and retail sales. The second condition limits residential dwelling units to a maximum of 30. Here's a snapshot looking at the change in entitlement. So today, 13 is the max number of units, and then the proposed zoning, of course, is the 30 units. There is an allowance for a little bit of office square footage, and then of course retail would be prohibited by that zoning condition number 1. Transportation in this area, there are some more transportation options than the city-wide average. There's an average transit score in this area. There is a lower bike score in this area than the citywide average. Higher job proximity than the citywide average. Here's a look at the bus access today. There is an existing bus stop right in front of the site there on Spring Forest Road. That's the 25L Triangle Town link. The request does not include any subsidized units, but it does check a lot of the boxes for allowing more variety, smaller units, and then of course it is within walking distance of transit. This area contains people, it is slightly less diverse than the citywide average, and then slightly higher income than the citywide average. And then rents in this area are increasing slightly slower than the rest of the cities. You can see that 23% versus the 25.5% in the rest of the city. The requested zoning district is consistent with the future land use designation of moderate scale residential. The request is consistent with the future land use map and the comprehensive plan. Several comprehensive plan policies flagged as consistent here. Consistent policies continued, and there are no inconsistent policies. Your deadline for action again is May 25th. Today's April 9th, so your upcoming meetings will be April 23rd and then May 14th, I believe. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have for staff.
Thank you very much. Moving on to public comment. For those in support, the applicant and those in favor will have a total of 10 minutes to speak. And please introduce yourself at the podium.
Madam Chair, I'm actually for an
Yes.
excuse. I need to step out for a moment.
Yes, ma'am. You are excused without objection.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Chad Essick, attorney with Pointer Sproul, 301 Fayetteville Street, Suite 1900. I'm here this morning on behalf of the applicant, Sandbrick Management, in connection with this rezoning application. Bronwyn's done a nice job of kind of summarizing this site, so I'll try not to be too repetitive. But this site is located at the corner of Spring Forest and Timber Ridge Road. Obviously, it is a currently vacant and wooded site. You have Millbrook High School directly across the street. And then just south of Dixie Forest Drive, across Spring Forest Drive, you have a Sam's Express Car Wash is located there. To the southeast of the site is a kinder care franchise facility, daycare, and then locally, and then to the west and the south of the site is the Franklin Woods condominium townhome community. As Bronwyn noted, the site is currently zoned R10. That zoning was placed on the property back in 1999, so almost 25 years ago. At the time of that rezoning in 1999, the property to the east that I was talking about, the Franklin Woods community, that site was undeveloped and zoned R6 at that time. So there were some conditions placed on this rezoning back in 1999 that, as staff notes in the staff report, are pretty outdated now 25 years later as this area has changed significantly. While the existing zoning would allow the property to be developed for the apartment building type, the existing zoning doesn't provide a lot of flexibility given kind of the irregularity shape of triangle nature of the lot. And so we've applied to rezone this to the RX3 conditional use, but we have proposed some conditions to address flume and comprehensive plan consistency, as well as some of the feedback we received at our 2 neighborhood meetings that we had. While the envision analysis that was initially done by staff indicated the RX3 would yield, in theory, about 70 units, that's not realistic in order to park the site and address other UDO requirements. So also, in response to some feedback we received at the neighborhood meeting, we have capped that residential density at 30 units. We believe that's what we can fit on this kind of small triangular shaped site. As staff noted, there is a bus stop directly in front of the site today, the 25L Triangle Town Link, which has hourly service. And Spring Forest Road is identified in the comprehensive plan as a frequent bus network corridor, which is subject to the policy supporting increased density and intensity along those transit corridors. As staff noted, we are consistent with the future land use map and the comprehensive plan. A number of policies and no outstanding issues or inconsistent policies have been identified. We did have a neighborhood meeting, initial neighborhood meeting back in early December at Millbrook Exchange Park. The one feedback we did receive from some of the neighbors that live along Timber Ridge, given that it is going to RX, it would allow a small amount of, since it's at the corner of 2 public intersections of retail uses. There was feelings of not wanting retail uses on that site, and we don't have any plans to do that. And so to address some of those concerns, as you see in the conditions, we have prohibited the retail use on the site. Again, we had a second neighborhood meeting on February 27th at Millbrook Exchange Park, and we talked with the neighbors. They were grateful for the condition regarding no retail. And to date, I've not been contacted by anyone that's concerned or has opposition to this case. So with that, Madam Chair, members of the commission, I'm happy to answer any questions, but we would respectfully ask that the commission provide a favorable recommendation to the request.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak in support of this project? Then seeing none, we will move on to the opposition. Those opposed to this case will have a total of 10 minutes to speak. And seeing none, we will bring it back to the table for any questions or comments from our commissioners. Yes, Commissioner Bennett.
Thank you. My question is for stormwater staff. I noted that there are some documented complaints about downstream flooding, but it seems that based on the drainage area map that the applicant provided, it says the requirements of the UDO do not apply to this site. So does that mean there are no concerns that development of this site would exacerbate that downstream flooding issue?
I can't say that there would be no concerns, but I can say that per the language in the UDO, they have provided a map. It's actually in the staff report that shows that they are about 4.5% of the drainage area to their site. And so even less to the downstream flooding locations. So per the UDO, they are not required to do additional stormwater control, so nothing beyond what any other project would have to do.
Okay.
Thank you.
So they're not, I'm sorry, could I just?
Please.
They're not required to, but based, I guess, on stormwater staff's professional opinion, is there something that could be done at the rezoning stage to at least give, I guess there's no guarantee, but better confidence that they won't be making an issue greater, worse?
Yeah, certainly, the UDO requires 2 and 10-year peak discharge control for all the projects that fall under the full stormwater rules. So, if the applicant were to offer conditions about less frequent storms, say the 25 or the 50 or the 100-year storm, that could be more protective, or using green stormwater infrastructure could be more protective of downstream flooding.
Would the applicant be interested in proposing conditions like that?
Thanks for the question. And just to clarify, staff did ask us to provide that drainage area map, and we did, indicating that we were less than 5%, which didn't trigger any additional stormwater impact analysis. That's kind of a hard thing at this stage. I think it's really something that we can address at site plan. Obviously, there's pretty stringent stormwater control measures that are required under the UDO, and so we'd prefer to address that at the site plan stage as opposed to the rezoning once we have a better idea of how the site's going to lay out. We're kind of dealing with the odd-shaped site here, and so respectfully, we think that's an issue that we could address at the site plan stage.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions from the commissioners? Commissioner Peeler?
Yeah, so in reading the demographic index for this, I know this is only a proposed 30-unit development. This is in a less racially diverse and in a wealthier area of Raleigh, and it's in a sort of a similar area to Raleigh to where we spent a lot of time talking recently about affordable housing. I think it would be great to see some voluntary, at least workforce housing, or even a lower AMI affordable housing on here. I think if you look on the staff report, you can see sorry, I scrolled away from it, but the demographic indicators show that, this is a place where we could be more inclusive with our development and more equitable. And I'd love to see us be a little more bold and a little more forward-thinking on how we include on-site housing to make our neighborhoods more diverse.
Thank you. Other thoughts from the Planning Commission? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion.
Just a quick comment. Normally, in this case, I would like to see retail included, even if it's not the intent of the applicant. But with the information that the neighbors were hesitant on including that, I would make a motion to approve. So I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated April 9th, 2024, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment for case Z61, 2023.
Thank you very much. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. And Those opposed? That motion passes 5-0. Thank you very much. I'm 5-2, excuse me. I wrote 2. 6-2. And the reasons citing for those who did not vote to approve are related to the stormwater and affordable housing.
Yeah, and I can be a little more specific too. I think
thing.
very recently too, we've in considering some rezonings in Southeast Raleigh, we've talked a lot about, and granted those were in the FTA, but we've talked a lot about how to make those demographic indicators a little more fair, and I think to be consistent, that's why I voted that way here. In a wider, richer part of Raleigh, we should hold everything to the same standard.
Thank you.
We get a lot of emails with videos showing flooding, the impacts of development on downstream. And so that was in my mind when I was reading about, here we have several documented cases of downstream flooding. And I think as we rest on our laurels about Raleigh getting all of these awards and all this recognition, and we now have a sustainability plan, and we're talking about climate action, I'd like to see us be more proactive when there are documented instances of downstream flooding and not just checking a box saying the UDO doesn't require it. I want to see us being more proactive and setting a model as the capital city.
Okay, thank you very much. And moving on to rezoning case Z8322 at Hillsborough Street and Turner Street. My website is not quite working properly, but this case is to change approximately 3.85 acres from multiple neighborhood mixed-use zoning districts to commercial mixed-use districts. And we will now turn to a presentation to receive a presentation from city planning staff.
Right, Hannah Reckow, Planning and Development. So this is case Z8222. It's an assemblage of parcels at about 3.8 acres located at Hillsborough Street and Turner Street. They currently have a mix of zoning districts, which are all have the base district of NX, neighborhood mixed use. And the request is to rezone to two mixed-use districts, CX7 urban limited conditional use and CX7 conditional use. The request retains the special residential parking overlay district. So you can see the zoning in this area. It's predominantly mixed use along Hillsborough Street. There are residential areas farther north and south of the site. I should mention the request is to apply the district with the frontage, so CX7 ULCU, to the parcels fronting on Hillsborough Street, and then a group of parcels to the south that front on Turner Street would not have that frontage. So location, this site is located near the intersection of Hillsborough Street and Gorman Street, a mix of commercial uses mainly along this portion of Hillsborough Street, variety of scales of housing in the larger area. Meredith College is to the northwest. Farther southeast is NC State University campus. And on the site currently are some commercial parcels fronting on Hillsborough Street. The old Arby's building, if you remember the sort of large sign, is on the northwest corner of the site. And then there's a vape shop on the corner of Hillsborough Street and Turner Street. And then a handful of residential along Turner Street. And then just to point out a few other things, to the east is Duke Energy substation, and there is additional housing on the south side of Turner Street along there. Here's some views of this site from the corner of Hillsborough and Turner, and then at the where Turner Street turns on the south part of the site. There are a handful of proposed conditions. These include prohibiting some uses, prohibiting drive-through, drive-in, hookah bar and vape tobacco shops, specifying building materials for facades, prohibiting certain materials, siding materials, and then limiting non-residential land uses to 300,000 square feet, and other categories, research and development and office and retail sales, having other caps as well. And then in the case that residential units are constructed, applying a minimum on-site parking rate of 1.5 spaces per unit, requiring a certain number of electric car charging stations at rates related to the amount of non-residential use and the amount of multi-unit living and hotel rooms. And then, apologize, I forgot to note this in the overview. There is a power line easement that runs straight through the site, through the middle of the site. So Condition 8 pertains to that. It's requiring 2 outdoor amenity areas in that area, and sort of specifies as components of that, of those areas. And then at least 1% of all the dwelling units would be dedicated as affordable to households earning no more than 80% of area median income for at least 18 years. And there's an option in that condition to pay the city a contribution per unit instead. And then a condition providing extended written notice before termination of leases due to redevelopment. So overall, what sort of snapshot of before and after: an increase in maximum building height, a removal of the existing conditions on part of the site, but then capping particularly non-residential land uses, so that a majority of the entitlement change is in residential. So the site has got proximity to many destinations and infrastructure, so a much higher walk score, transit score, bike score, higher proximity to jobs in the area. It does have access to a number of routes, go Raleigh Route 12, go Triangle Route 100, and then 2 Wolf Line routes as well. The request would increase housing entitlement. It does include some subsidized units and would permit a variety of housing types. It's within walking distance of transit. Area residents are much less likely to be racial minorities than the city average, but much more likely to be low income compared with the city average. I think it's worth noting that there are larger sort of student populations in this area, which may be affecting those numbers. And the future land use map designation for this site is community mixed use. So from a use perspective, the requested CX is in line with that. It's with the height that's requested, the request is inconsistent with the designation. And there's a few pieces to that. The comprehensive plan, table LU2, which includes the height recommendations. There's a core transit context here, which does recommend up to 7 stories. There's also an edge context with the lower scale residential south of Turner Street. The comprehensive plan views when those overlap as being a general context, which would recommend no more than 5 stories. And a few urban form designations here, including a frequent transit area, transit emphasis corridor. The request includes an urban limited frontage along Hillsborough Street, so it is consistent with those designations. And then it is consistent overall with the comprehensive plan. That includes policies on sort of the mix of land uses, providing student-oriented housing, facilitating alternative transportation options, and then conditions pertaining to urban form and frontage. And then inconsistent policies are really all centered on height. So the future land use map designation recommending 5 stories. There's an area plan for Cameron Village, Hillsborough Street, which has very specific guidance for this site of CX5. And as a reminder, your deadline for action is in the end of May. Happy to answer any
Thank you very
questions.
much. And moving to public comment, for those in support, the applicant and those in favor will have a total of 10 minutes to speak, and please introduce yourself at the podium.
Good morning, members of Planning Commission. Worth Mills here on behalf of City Plat LLC, who is the owner of most of the properties within this rezoning assemblage and the primary rezoning applicant. The request to rezone these 14 properties, just under 4 acres, from a mix of neighborhood mixed-use zoning districts to a combination of CX7 urban limited conditional use and CX7 conditional use would bring additional density to an area that's within walking distance of 2 universities, Meredith College and NC State. The future land use map, as Hannah mentioned, is community mixed use. We are in the center of a large mixed use area and a frequent transit area. And again, this is providing for a denser, more intense product that is well served by bus lines and in close proximity to 2 universities. So as Hannah mentioned, there is a Duke Power easement that runs through the center of the property from the Duke Energy substation to our east, and you can see the boundaries of that easement area outlined in blue. The 3 properties that front on Hillsborough Street, as Hannah mentioned as well, the old Arby's, a vape shop, and a vacant commercial parcel. The remainder of the properties are single-family and duplex homes that are mostly rented out to students. Here's a street view from Hillsborough, one from Turner Street, another from Turner Street. I'll note that all of the houses that exist today were built between 1925 and 1952. There are 3 separate zoning districts on the site, so those along Hillsborough Street currently have an urban limited frontage. We would keep that in place with our proposed rezoning. The properties to the rear on Turner Street, outlined in green, are zoned NX3 with no frontage, and we want to keep that same sort of dichotomy between the south side and the north side of this site. And here you can see the proposed zoning district. So the area with an urban limited frontage is outlined in red, the area without in green. The plan for development here would be to develop on either side of that Duke Energy power easement. So a building fronting on Hillsborough Street and another building on the south side of that easement area. We have a number of zoning conditions in place today that limit types of uses and the amount of non-residential development. We do have in place a minimum parking ratio that was brought up to us at our second neighborhood meeting. And in response to those comments from neighbors, we've included a minimum ratio of electric car charging stations, 2 publicly accessible outdoor amenity areas, each of at least 4,000 square feet within the Duke power easement. We spoke with Duke Energy months ago about the possibility of locating kind of surface level improvements within that easement area. They said that's mostly fine in other instances that they've seen. They're more concerned about vertical improvements such as buildings, light poles, tall landscaping that could interfere with their ability to access and maintain the equipment that they have within that easement area. But we'll continue to work with them to make sure that we're not impeding any of their rights that they hold through that easement and that the amenity areas are safe for residents and guests as well. We've also included 1% of all dwelling units as affordable at 80% AMI for at least 18 years with an option to contribute $40,000 per affordable unit to the city's affordable housing fund, and included an increased written notice period to the then tenants of the single-family or duplex homes if the leases are going to, not be renewed because of redevelopment on this site. We heard a lot from neighbors about public benefits and how this rezoning can benefit the public, and we've tried to accomplish that both with our publicly accessible outdoor amenity area and the affordable housing condition. So even though a TIA was not required for this rezoning, the applicant went ahead and performed one anyway, so that we had this information for Planning Commission, for City Council, and for neighbors as well. We studied 6 intersections, which are designated with the red dots, and it assumed a driveway access onto Hillsborough and a driveway access onto Turner. I'll say, though, that the access for the site has not been fully fleshed out. That's something that we would like to do at site plan to determine if it's better to have 2 access points on Turner Street or, again, have one on Hillsborough, one on Turner. Recommendations for the street improvements would include a right-in from Hillsborough onto Turner Street and a right-in to the site on the backside of Turner Street. I think the most important thing to note here is that when we studied these intersections, all intersections performed at an acceptable level of service under the UDO. Each intersection continued to operate at a level D or higher, with many in the more residential areas north of us maintaining an A or a B rating during peak hours, AM and PM. I did want to talk about the future land use map consistency and the height guidance for this site. So the property is designated as community mixed use, and it's within the center of a mixed use center that is more than 30 acres in size. And so that would normally place you within a core transit area. The table LU2 height designation, when you align the community mixed use future land use map designation and the core transit designation, allows for a maximum height of 12 stories, not 7 stories. There is a portion that is within 150 feet of the single-family homes on the south side of Turner Street. That would be considered, and staff has considered that portion to be an edge property, so anything within 150 feet of areas that are low to moderate scale, or low to moderate density with heights up to 3 stories, which again, those properties are zoned NX3 today. I think by the letter of the law, or the letter of the policy, it qualifies. I don't know if this is really the intent of the edge properties to buffer heights and lower heights in areas that are currently mixed use zoned and planned to be mixed use zoning moving forward. But when you have both a property or an area that's considered an edge and a core transit area, the comp plan says that is considered what's called a general area. So just taking the letter of the policy, there's a portion of the site that would recommend heights up to 12 stories, and the southern portion that would recommend heights up to 5 stories, again, within that area within 150 feet of the homes on Turner Street. And so we think that a proposed zoning of 7 stories is a good compromise between the maximum 12 stories that are recommended along Hillsborough Street and the 5 stories that would be recommended on the south side. And that 7 stories is much closer to 5 stories than it is 12. The site is within the Cameron Village Hillsborough Street Small Area Plan. It's on the western boundary. Recommended heights of 5 stories and designated as community mixed use. I'll note again that the single-family homes to our south are also designated as community or commercial mixed use 5 stories. So I think lowering heights to an area that's also planned and primed for more intense development is somewhat short-sighted and not great long-range planning. So to summarize the rezoning, We are proposing to rezone 14 properties of almost 4 acres from multiple mixed-use or neighborhood mixed-use designations to CX7 urban limited conditional use and CX7 conditional use. We think that the proposed 7-story height is a healthy compromise between the 12-story height recommended on the north side, the 5-story height recommended on the south side, and the 5-story recommended height within the small area plan. The rezoning would facilitate additional housing within walking distance of 2 universities. The zoning conditions offer publicly accessible outdoor amenity space and affordable housing conditions. And we have completed a voluntary TIA to show that all studied intersections would continue to operate at an acceptable level of service. Happy to answer any questions and appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just so I can get a sense, even though we're out of time, is there anyone else here who'd like to speak in support of this project? Then seeing none, we will move on to the opposition. Those opposed to this case will have a total of 10 minutes to speak, and please introduce yourself at the podium.
Hello, my name's Donna Bailey, and I live in the area, and I'm here to address some of the concerns that we heard at 2 CAC meetings. So we know okay, I wanted to point out here where you can see the individual buildings better that there will be a loss of 11 NOAA houses. So if we think about people living in those are generally 4 people per house. So we're talking about 44 people being displaced. This is a view of the street, and what I want to bring your attention to is this south side of Turner Street here on the, let's see, right along here. There are 2 new houses here, and there's another new house, 2 or 3 new houses, and there's another house right over here that is about to be built. So these houses are new. So they're there, and it's mostly student rental, but the point is, these are houses that have been already built recently, and they're gonna be there for quite a while. So our biggest concern that we heard was about transitions to residential. This is within the small area plan for Hillsborough Street. And the bottom portion is where we really have a concern, is where they're asking to go from NX3 to NX7. That's over a doubling of what is there now. And it's a very concern for the people who live there on that south side of Turner Street, that they would potentially have a 7-story building right across the street. And this is the area here that's NX3. I believe there's probably some flexibility with that, and so I just believe there needs to be some transition. Transitions were really important, not only in the small area plan, but it's one of the 6 goals in the UDO about transitioning, and this is on the edge, so it's very important. So the small area plan, as you saw, recommends 5 stories that transitions in the small area plan. No more than 3 stories is recommended adjacent to residences. So this is actually not totally adjacent, it's across the street, but it still needs to be recognized that there are single-family residences there. You saw the same map, this is from the small area plan, which, this area got a lot of guidance, so it is recommended at 5 stories. I personally don't have a problem with 7 stories on the frontage, but I do believe that it needs to come down in the back. The other thing that I have a real problem with is, this is a transit emphasis corridor, and it's in the frequent transit area. That recommends 20% affordable housing at 60% AMI for 30 years. This is exactly the kind of mixed-use area that needs affordable housing. It's walkable, it's on the frequent transit. This is where we need people who need transit. This is where they live. And I think they're saying on one hand, It's on a transit emphasis corridor, but they're only offering 1% affordable housing. I think that's totally inadequate. Let me see what else is there. Okay, so this is the actual policies I'm referring to. New affordable units shall meet the standards of the FTDO, 20% of added units at 60% for 30 years. A development site may contain additional residential units, provided a number of units equal to at least 20% of the residential units over 12 established within the development site shall be affordable for households earning 60% and 30%. So this is where, okay, the other thing is they could have gotten their additional 2 stories. It's already zoned at 5. They went through a rezoning just in 2018, so they had already upzoned this just a few years ago, and they could get their 7 stories by just following what the FTDO says, and by, you know, increasing the density, but adding the affordability. So my question to you is, we have all these great policies to, you know, increase affordability, and, you know, if you're not going to follow them, what good is it? So at this point, I would like to ask you to deny the rezoning or postpone it and see if the applicant can come back with some better, you know, affordability, more affordability, a transition to the rear. And like I said, I don't think there's a lot of pushback with 7 stories on the frontage. I don't think that's the problem. It's transitioning to the rear. And if anybody has any questions, and they did come to 2 CAC meetings, we had probably 30 or 40 people at each meeting, and these are the concerns that were brought up at the CAC meeting.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak in opposition of this project? If so, please come to the podium and introduce yourself.
Good morning. My name is Kenny Krause. I live at 3301 Clark Avenue, which is the property to the north. Clark Avenue is probably the largest street that runs parallel to Hillsborough. And when the city proposed and then implemented the roundabouts, we were told as a neighborhood that it would, you know, enhance Hillsborough Street. I guess, you know, that's of opinion, but I think it has done what it was supposed to do. But we were also told, in order for the roundabouts to work, about 30% of the traffic would need to be diverted probably to Western Boulevard. Of course, they told that to the folks on Clark Avenue because we don't live on Western Boulevard. So we bought into that as well. Since then, there has been upwards of 4, maybe 5 buildings that have been placed in there where are typical, I guess, what you would refer to as student housing, which has drastically impacted the traffic. Again, they worked with the neighborhood. We knew it was coming. We live next to NC State. We chose the neighborhood because the neighbors love living next to NC State. So it's a give and take. What was not shown in the photos is on the opposite side of Hillsborough Street, where this plot of land is looking to be rezoned, is another student housing that the council worked with the neighborhood, the conditions were met. And once again, were we thrilled about it? Probably not. But it's give and take. You get to live next to a fine university, it's give and take. In this instance, and just sitting here, I noticed that how methodical the other 2 rezoning cases were brought to you. That there is actually something to show you. Something like, this is what the land is going to be. In this instance, there's an inconsistency that's being asked for, and you have no idea what's going to be put there. We as a neighborhood have no idea what's going to be put there. And specifically, how do you enter it? How do you exit Hillsborough and enter this, what would be double the residency of that? So from a person who's very ignorant on how all this works, I mean, quite honestly, I had this on the March schedule. I didn't know that you could divert it till April. I didn't even know you could park in the back and get your validated tickets. Okay, so this is not my ballywick. However, my ballywick is what's fair. And knowing I'm all for what somebody wants to build on their land that is zoned for it. And if they want to change that zone, then show what's going to be put there. As neighbors, we bought our property based on the zoning. If things are going to change, tell us what that is going to be, and then make conditions and concessions for that changing. But to do it where you buy a piece of land, you get it rezoned so that it enhances the value of that land, again, from an outsider looking in, appears to be just a pure money grab. And the other piece of this would be the affordable housing, how methodical they went through that on the first group. And my time is up. Again, I didn't even know that there was a time constraint. Bless you all, and thank you for letting me talk.
Thank you, Mr. Kraus. Our time is up, but just by show of hands, are there any other members of the public who would like to speak in opposition to this project? Then, seeing none, we will bring it back to the table for questions and comments from our commissioners. Who would like to start? Vice Chair Raines.
Thanks, Chair Miller. This may be a question for transportation staff. Is there an intent to connect Turner to Gorman?
We'd like to hear from staff, please. Thank you.
Good morning, Margaret Tartalla, City Transportation. So Turner Street's not at grade with Gorman. There's like probably 20 feet between the two. So no, that is not planned.
Okay, thanks. Easy question.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Bennett.
I have a lot of questions.
Yes.
Is this planned to be student housing, first of all?
Hey, good morning, Commissioner Bennett. I think that's the likeliest scenario is that it's geared towards student housing. So primarily market rate apartments, and I'm sure there's a lot of students who would, jump at that chance to live there.
Okay. Because one of the policy consistencies was student-oriented housing, so I was just making sure it actually was student-oriented housing. I've been hearing a lot this year at a number of community meetings about housing insecurity for students at NC State. A lot, particularly as we're planning the BRT routes. And so I'm wondering if this is likely to be student housing. There are a lot of students that can't afford market rate housing. As a mother of a student who can't afford market rate housing, I understand the struggle of trying to find housing close to campus. So I'm concerned about the 1% affordability for only 18 years, particularly if the FTDO could be used to get those 2 additional stories. So if it's already zoned for 5 and you want to go to 7, but the 7 is inconsistent, particularly on the back half, what would make me as a planning commissioner and just a resident feel better would be there's some sort of significant community benefit that we could say, this is inconsistent, but I feel like the community is really getting something, so we'll let it go. I don't know that 1% affordable housing for 18 years, when you're displacing people who are there who, I mean, we've said they're likely students, but I mean, they're students. Students are stakeholders as well. I don't know that that tilts the scale for me in favor of significant community benefit that would justify the height inconsistency, particularly on the back half where it's adjacent to those single-family homes. I'll stop there for now. I have some other questions and comments, but I'll let others speak.
Thank you very much. And would the applicant like to respond to that?
Yeah, we are, excuse me, we're open to, looking at additional affordable housing. The affordable housing method and the height bonus that's in the UDO, I have not seen anybody at scale take that option yet. I think I've seen maybe a duplex or a fourplex that's able to finesse that that amount of affordable housing into their project and make it work. But I haven't seen a intense multifamily project be able to utilize that yet. So I'm not opposed to offering more affordable housing, but that UDO kind of permission slip in the TOD, I just think it hasn't been able to pencil for anybody yet. And so I couldn't stand here today and say that we're going to commit to a standard that is within the TOD because, again, we haven't seen it work yet. But we are open to looking at different percentages, different AMIs, different time lengths, and happy to explore that further.
Thank you. Any other comments on the affordable housing piece before we move on? Just trying to stay organized on the list of comments.
Yes. I know this can't be a condition because we've talked about this before on other cases, but would the applicant perhaps consider some sort of priority for those who are being displaced in terms of applying to the new development? I understand the extended notice period. I appreciate that you're doing that, but they're in a prime location right now. And so I know they're students, I know they're transient, but if there could just be some sort of relocation assistance for them or priority given to them to return to the new development, I feel like that would be, again, in that community benefit column.
I think I'm open to working with the city attorney's office on what that condition would look like. I know that we can't condition ownership or occupancy, but
I wasn't asking for a condition. We've heard before that that can't be a condition because it's tough to enforce it. It would be a nice consideration on the applicant's part.
Okay.
Thank you. Other comments on the affordable housing piece? Yes.
No comments. I agree with Commissioner Bennett. I figured if we started at that side of the table, I wouldn't need to make comment, but I'm just letting the applicant know I agree with Ms. Bennett on the affordable housing piece. So also understand, Mr. Mills, how difficult it is to get those projects to pencil out. So again, maybe there's a way that we can slide the rule and make something work there.
Yeah, I think there's room to thread that needle. Unfortunately, with building costs and just the overall cost to build these projects, I haven't seen anybody take that TOD option at a scale that we would like as a city. But again, open to offering affordable housing and looking at ways that we can improve what we've already offered.
Thank you. And yes, I know I characterized your comments as affordable housing, but I know that you focused also in your comments on just other community benefits also. So there may be some other creative ideas or ways to sort of approach some of those community benefit issues.
Certainly.
Or public benefit, excuse me. Other comments from the commissioners? Yep.
You just asked about affordable housing, so I just wanted to put that comment in. But I also agree with Ms. Bennett, and it won't come to surprise anybody up here. I'm also concerned about the 7-story height across existing residential, and especially with the easement and the opportunity to look at a way, whether it be through setbacks or heights, whatever, to give a little bit more breathing space there. I would feel much more comfortable supporting this, but I do want to say that I appreciate the efforts for all the things that you've done for including affordable housing, the amenity space, electric charging, all of those things that you're trying to do. I think there's just a couple more pieces that we need to take a look at.
Yeah, I'll say, you know, and Ms. Bailey can, you know, she may feel differently, but I feel like there's been a lot of collaboration. This has been a long rezoning process. I mean, it's got a 2022 case number on it. I think our first neighborhood meeting was in August or September of 2022. So it's taken a lot of different iterations. Appreciate the immediate neighbors who came to the first and second neighborhood meeting and the Hillsborough Wade CAC for keep letting us come back and give updates. And, you know, we'll continue to kind of keep those lines of communication open.
Thank you very much. And Commissioner Bennett, did you have a follow-up? You said you had a list of items. Ms. Bailey, we are holding at the table right now. Thank you.
Is it possible that I make a comment to some of the things that have been said?
Not at this time, but we might if we have additional time. We have many cases today.
Very short.
Thank you. Commissioner Bennett?
The other thing I had on my list was the amenity area and the power line easement. There are no public health concerns about that? I mean, maybe not, maybe it just seems kind of creepy to me to be hanging out in the power line easement.
Sure, I understand. In the conversations that I've had with Bruce Pate, who's kind of their asset manager and who kind of looks at all of these power line easements, their main concern is going to be, we're not going to let you build. We're going to be very strict on the heights of any site features that you put up, such as like parking or lighting for surface parking areas, or the types of trees that you may plant in that area. On the ground level, they're generally open to improvements. The example that Mr. Pate showed me was in Holly Springs at Ting Park, where they've got a transmission line running through, and the entire easement area is paved parking. People are free to move throughout as they please. And so our expectation is that we'll be able to come up with a similar ground level activation within the easement area here, and do so in a way that is safe and doesn't interfere with Duke's ability to get in and service any of the equipment that might be on site. I think there's one tower within that easement area today. And so that's probably the area where you're going to have the most protections in place. And that was also a reason that we tried to separate out. Instead of saying we're going to have one outdoor amenity area of 10,000 square feet, we wanted to kind of break it up and make sure that you can give adequate space to that one transmission line. And so we went with two outdoor amenity areas of at least 4,000 square feet. So hopefully between the conversations that we've had with Duke already and the ability to kind of break that easement area or that amenity area up, it'll be able to function as any other outdoor amenity space could. And again, that will be publicly accessible, and that was one of the things that we wanted to include as a benefit to the public.
Two more.
Yes.
If you do the 0.5 parking spaces per unit, just assuming everybody brings a car, we hope they don't, but if they do, where will the overflow be?
And that was a question that we heard from the CAC back in March. That is just to set a floor, because right now the city doesn't have any parking minimums. I would fully expect that anybody that lives there is going to have a parking space at the site. Most likely this is going to be, if you've got two buildings on either side of the power line easement, you would have each apartment building kind of wrap an interior parking deck. And so from a marketability standpoint, we plan to have more than the 0.5 parking spaces per unit. But at the same time, we at least wanted to show the neighborhood that we can set a floor that is higher than what the city has today. So that was really the intent of that condition, just to at least have some assurances that there's going to be some on-site parking there. But I think, again, from a financing marketability standpoint, you're going to need to be able to park a car at that site, and I expect any development here to do that.
Thank you. And my last question was, if we're expecting this to be majority students, even if we weren't, are there any considerations for bicycle or pedestrian amenities?
We can look into that. It's not a conversation that I guess has really been pertinent to our neighborhood meetings and our CAC meetings. But happy to look into any additional infrastructure over and above what the UDO would require. So we can take a look at that as well in the interim.
Thanks, Worth.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Mills, I might also add on the public benefit piece with the bicycle parking or similar amenities, perhaps also pet waste stations in that area. There's a number of, pet walkers and those kind of things, and that can be a huge benefit.
Sure thing.
Through the area. Thank you. Other comments from the commissioners? Vice Chair Raines.
Yes, Chair Miller, I also echo Commissioner Bennett and O'Haver's comments about the opportunity for affordable housing on this site, especially adjacent to two universities. But I also understand the issue of making it work financially. With that, I think, move to height. I think going south along Turner Street, I also agree with other commissioners' comments that 5 stories feels a bit more appropriate for the south portion, south of the easement. I would support an application that we revised it for 7 along Hillsborough and 5 along the back half. So I think that would be beneficial for the public if the applicant would be willing to look into that.
Thank you. Would the applicant like to respond?
Yes, we can look at lowering heights on the south side of that easement as well. And, kind of looking forward, I think in terms of coming back to Planning Commission, if that first meeting in May works for Planning Commission, I think that should give us enough time to evaluate the items that we discussed today and get new conditions back for that first meeting in May.
Thank you very much. Other comments that could help inform the action between now and the next meeting in May? Yes, Commissioner Bennett.
I'm curious, Worth, when you had your neighborhood meetings or the CAC meetings, did any students or any of the people living in the homes that would potentially be displaced show up and speak?
I think I don't think there were any at the first neighborhood meeting. There were, I think, 3 residents at the second neighborhood meeting. They were presumably college students, and they're around 20 years old, I would assume. They were, their question was, am I going to still have this lease from the date that I signed it? So they were, I think, more concerned about any impacts to their existing lease than what the future project may look like. But I think that was the only interaction that we've had with any of the tenants in those homes. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Other comments that might inform our May meeting on this item?
What I have isn't as specific as what you all have shared, but I definitely share Commissioner Bennett, O'Haver, and Raines' comments about the affordable housing and everything else. Just, I wanted to briefly mention the 7-story height on the northern part along Hillsborough. I mean, while it's inconsistent with the future land use map, and when you look along Hillsborough at IMAPs going towards the school and towards downtown, that is all zoned a mix of 3, 4, and 5, and on the south side of Hillsborough specifically, which would align with where the north side of the site is, that's all 4 and 5-story mixed-use zoning. So 7 would be well above what is even built, and there's some great developments along there, the Stanhope and many other of those. It would be well above, what is closer to the urban core. So I want to point that out. And then something else we talk about sometimes in this commission is, building styles once you jump from the 4 to 5-story height up to 7, and you generally see more concrete and steel construction, less stick built, which just as a baseline tends to make things more expensive, less affordable, more kind of luxury angled. I think trying to keep things affordably sized and affordable, using affordable materials is crucial when you're building around a university. And when we're talking about, unsubsidized ways to get affordable housing or more affordable priced units. So I hope that makes sense, but I think I would love to see the north side of this stay in that 5 and under zoning to be consistent and also for just natural affordability.
Thank you for your comment. Other thoughts from the commissioners? In that case, for consistency for past meetings as well, I'll add that I am very much aware of the housing insecurity for students at NC State, and I am glad to see more housing and more density happening in this corridor with access to transit and retail and commercial and the university. And I also recognize that regardless of where this falls in the price point, as long as it's meeting demand, it's going to relieve pressure on the rest of the housing demands for student housing in this area as well. So I look forward to seeing the changes to these, but overall, glad to see more student housing coming up. So with that, I'd like to make a motion to defer this case to our first meeting in May so that the applicant can make additional comments or conditions based on public benefit items, in particular affordable housing, potentially, and also looking at bicycle and pet waste facilities, and also looking at height transitions to the southwest, and potentially also considering height along Hillsborough Street. Any other items that I missed on the list of conditions? With that, then I have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. That motion passes 8-0.
And just to confirm, that's the 14th of May.
The 14th of May, yes. Thank you very much. Moving on to our next item, item F4, rezoning case Z124 at Wake Forest Road. This case is to change approximately 0.69 acres from OX3 with a neighborhood conservation overlay district to OX4 urban limited with conditions. And we will turn to Matthew Burns for a presentation from city planning staff.
Good morning, commissioners. Matthew Burns with Planning and Development. So yeah, this is, as you said, a request to rezone from OX3 and with the neighborhood conservation overlay to OX4 urban limited with conditions and remove the NCOD, and your deadline for action is June 8th. Zoning in the area is a mix of residential and mixed use. The site's near several moderate and medium scale residential uses, but also some commercial nodes, notably at the intersection of East Franklin Street and Person Street, and then a little bit farther south along Person Street. It's also fairly close to Peace University and Seaboard Station, as well as being across the street from the Mordecai Historic Park and pretty close to Oakwood. Some nearby points of interest include Person Street Plaza, which I mentioned, the Raleigh City Farm, Oakwood neighborhood, and the Brian Lee Funeral Home. Here are a couple views of the site, one northeast on Wake Forest Road and the other southwest on Wake Forest Road. Proposed conditions would prohibit some uses that are normally permitted in OX. They would also require a minimum 50-foot primary building setback from the southeastern lot line, which it shares with 3 adjacent properties to the southeast. Required a minimum 10-foot wide protective yard with a fence between 6.5 and 9 feet high along that same southeastern lot line. Establish a maximum building height for townhomes of 3 stories and 45 feet. And establish a maximum building height on the property overall to 50 feet. The request would increase entitlement for office and retail uses. However, it would reduce the maximum number of units that could be built, as the proposed conditions require those setbacks that I mentioned, which effectively reduce the developable area of the site. The site has a higher walk score than average, average transit score and bike score, very low transportation costs, and very high access to jobs. So the site is served by Go Raleigh Route 1, Capitol Boulevard, and WRX, which goes to Wake Forest. It's also fairly close to Route 3, which is Glasscock. Oh. The request would subtract from the housing supply. It does not include subsidized units, permits a variety of housing types, allows smaller units, and is within walking distance of transit. I'll note that the subtracting from the housing supply is due to the fact that those conditions require additional buffering from the existing residential uses nearby. Area residents are less likely to be racial minorities compared to the city average, less likely to be low income, and the cost of rent has increased almost 60% since 2016, which is faster than the city average. The request is consistent with the future land use maps designation of office and residential mixed use. It is also consistent with the urban form map as it includes an urban limited frontage. So overall, it's consistent with the comprehensive plan, future land use map, and urban form map. Consistent policies are largely related to compact development, housing variety, and development near transit, as well as zoning for housing. And inconsistent policy is related to the removal of the Mordecai NCOD. And there are no outstanding issues, and your deadline for action is June 8th. I will note that there are some documented cases of structural flooding downstream from the site, and the applicant provided a stormwater drainage map for that. May I answer any questions before you open the meeting or before you discuss the case?
Not at this time, but we might have some for you after. Thank you. Moving on to the public comment. For those in support, the applicant and those in favor will have a total of 10 minutes to speak, and please introduce yourself at the podium.
Good morning. My name is James Todd. I'm with Smith Anderson at 150 Fayetteville Street, Suite 2300. Here on behalf of the development team, Carpenter Development Group, David Meeker, and Kate Charland, also Chip Dillard of Elmwood Development. As Matthew explained, the request today is to modify the zoning from OX3 with the Mordecai 2 NCOD overlay to OX4 with urban limited frontage, conditional use, and the removal of the NCOD. The primary goal of the rezoning request is to allow for the construction of a boutique apartment on the site. This is located in the Person Street corridor, located to the north of the Person Street Plaza, immediately north of a currently vacant commercial use. The property is already zoned OX, which is consistent with a lot of the properties there that are fronting on Wake Forest Road. We're sensitive to the neighbors to the rear of the site, where the site is adjacent to single-family residential. That is the motivation behind the 10-foot landscaping buffer. There are uses, apartments above a certain height, that would trigger that protective yard today. So the goal of the condition is to ensure that that 10-foot protective yard is offered, regardless if ultimately the project is developed as a smaller apartment building or townhomes, for example, which would not currently qualify for that 10-foot setback. The 50-foot proposed setback for the apartment use is a significant increase over what's offered today. I think under the existing OX3, you could see townhome uses as close as 6 feet to that rear property line. Understanding that this is a merger of several lots and a more intense use than the 3 currently vacant homes that are on the property today. We've offered that 50-foot apartment setback as well as the 10-foot buffer yard that I already mentioned. I will note too, before we go too far, the applicant is intending to provide additional conditions related to townhome uses on the site. So we'd ask that you defer your recommendation today until the April meeting. We'd like to be heard. We think this is a good opportunity to get in front of the Planning Commission for y'all to begin your consideration, but ask for a deferral of a recommendation until we have time to submit those revised conditions in time for that first April meeting.
Just to clarify, this second April meeting?
The first April meeting. Or, I'm sorry, we are at the first April meeting. The second, the April 23rd meeting.
April 23rd.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you.
This year is already moving kind of quick.
That's right.
Yeah.
What day is it?
So we think the site is well suited for the type of smaller, denser residential that's proposed. The staff report noted that this is a very walkable site. Most errands can be accomplished on foot. There's a variety of restaurants and bars and other walkable uses located to the south. It is a frequent transit area. Additional density for housing and employment is appropriate around current and future frequent transit routes noted by the comprehensive plan. And staff also noted that this would allow a modest increase, or allowing a modest increase in density would allow more people to live and work in this high opportunity area with convenient access to jobs, educational and recreational commercial amenities. The background behind the requested removal of the Mordecai NCOD designation is really to allow the type of use that the applicant is proposing. The max lot size in the Mordecai 2 NCOD is 0.3 acres, which would not accommodate the potentially apartment-style development that the applicant has envisioned for this property. It also would prohibit the fourth story that we think is important to allowing the type of density to take advantage of the frequent transit benefits of the area, as well as the walkability that we've mentioned. We also don't think that the removal negatively impacts the rest of the NCOD. This is located towards the southern edge of that existing Mordecai 2 NCOD, and is consistent with the development that has occurred to the southeast of the property. Some of the conditions that have been offered in terms of the 50-foot apartment setback and the 10-foot protective yard, certainly are aimed at buffering any impacts that this would have on the adjacent neighbors. But we think that the removal of the NCOD is not a negative impact on the remainder of that overlay district. I'd like to introduce David Meeker as part of the development team to discuss their vision for the property and answer questions you may have about some of the community engagement that's been done to this point. Thank you.
Hey everybody, David Meeker with Carpenter Development. Little background on us. We've done mostly what I call creative retail in downtown Raleigh and nearby the last 15 years. Good example of one of our earlier projects was Beasley's Chicken and Honey. Bought that, renovated it, and leased it to Ashley Christensen. And a good example of one of our projects in the last couple of years is the Brookside Center over at the corner of Brookside and Glasscock. Retail on the first floor, residential upstairs. Bought that and renovated that. Sort of gives you an idea of what we've done. Our partner in this deal, Elmwood Development, they are starting their third project of this scale in downtown Durham. This is their first in Raleigh. We're excited to partner with them. As mentioned, we're requesting a 4-story zoning so that we can build a boutique apartment project. Wake Forest Road is a high-traffic road. To us, this sort of scale fits that level of traffic. Also, this is, of course, walkable to Person Street. It's just around the corner, but also walkable and bikeable to downtown Raleigh, and hopefully give some folks an opportunity to live without a car. We think this is one of the most desirable neighborhoods in Raleigh, all of Raleigh, and there's not a lot of housing options other than buying a house for close to $1 million, or obviously can go higher than that. This will give folks an option to live in the neighborhood, a different option. Folks who may not want to stay 5 years or whatever time frame it makes sense to buy a house, or folks who can't afford a down payment will now have an option to sort of stay in the neighborhood. We have talked with a lot of the small businesses along Person Street. We think the density will help them. Some of them are thriving, don't need any additional customers, but some do and could benefit. And we think this project will help. And then in this rezoning process, we had roughly 20 coffee meetings with neighborhoods who backed up to it. And then we had the 2 required neighborhood meetings with a bigger crowd. What we heard, some folks were excited about the project. We have some urbanists, environmentalists who live in the neighborhood, including Tom Berry, who are excited about the density, and some were understandably apprehensive. Change is hard. Even those folks, though, some of them mentioned they were excited about a local developer doing this project versus somebody from out of town. And I happen to live in the neighborhood, so it'll be important to me to do this right, because obviously got to live with it and live with the neighbor's reaction to it. And last thing I wanted to say was materials, high quality materials are important to us and important to the neighbors. That kept coming up. To us, that probably means nice brick, nice windows, very thoughtful design, but just wanted to let you know that we were thinking long and hard about that, and we'll make sure to do that. And that concludes my remarks. Thanks for your consideration, and let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak in support of this project? Seeing none, then we'll move on to the opposition. Those opposed to this case will have a total of 10 minutes to speak. And seeing none, we can bring it back. Oh, yes, excuse me, and please introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Sylvain Dufour. I own 809 North Bloodworth. That's the property sharing the southeast line with this project. So this project, I think the back line is 199 feet. My property is 130 feet, so about 2/3 of the property. We had some coffee meeting. I'm excited about the density of the project and what it brings in the retail. I'm concerned about the height at 50 feet. I think, right now we have 4 very low houses, 1.5 story, and COD allows 35 feet. Going to 50 is extremely high. I appreciate the buffer and the 6.5-foot fence, but I think, it's going to have a major impact in terms of privacy on the rest of the neighbors. So my only concern is the height of the project.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public who'd like to speak in opposition? Then in that case, seeing none, we'll bring it back to the table. Any questions from our commissioners? Vice Chair Raines.
Thanks, Chair Miller. On the materials, I appreciate the information you provided to the intent is to provide quality materials and detailing. Would the applicant entertain prohibition of vinyl and EFS from use on this project as an additional condition for siting?
We might take a minute to think about that. I think we're definitely on vinyl, no problem at all. In EFS, we just have to figure out, we're not planning to have the majority of the building EFS at all, but if there's some storefront or something where there was a section there, so if we can follow up on that piece. But big picture, absolutely.
Thank you. And since you're up there, the other conditions that you're going to consider, could we have a preview of what those are, or are you still formulating?
On the townhome conditions, yeah, I think like we were planning to build a 4-story apartment building here. With financing where it is, it's nice to have a backup option if it doesn't work. And and those were around townhomes, and I think it would be, maybe those would be shorter in height and allowed to be a little closer to the back line. And we're working those out. But that's hopefully a backup option.
Thank you. Other comments from the commissioners? Commissioner Peeler.
So 2 questions. First, I was just in looking at what currently is at these sites now. Looks like, some single-family houses, in particular 818, looks to be an affordable, naturally occurring affordable triplex. Curious if y'all anticipate having any conditions for any kind of, any kind of condition revolving that. And then my second part of that question is, do you anticipate any conditions about on-site affordability outside of the currently existing triplex I mentioned?
Yeah. Okay. So a little more background. We don't own the properties yet, and they're currently boarded up, so not rented now. We do want to do some affordable housing. And one idea we've thrown around internally is 3 units, because there are 3 houses there. That'd be 5% of the houses. What we prefer to do is to get the rezoning approved without that, because this is like total transparency. We don't have financing yet. Some of that is the financing market is hard right now. But some of that is these smaller projects are hard to make work because you have the same management costs of an apartment building and spread across way less units. Instead of 250 units, it's 50 units, and it's just hard to make them work. And then additionally, the neighborhood is asking for, and we want to deliver on nicer materials and more thoughtful design. So it's just a lot, and it's hard to be everything to everybody. But I've done a lot of work around affordable housing on the nonprofit side. Really want to do it on the for-profit side, and we're going to try, although we would prefer to get approved without it. Best case scenario, we do it. Second best case scenario, the project happens without affordable housing. I think that's good for us, obviously good for the city, more units, and that helps. Worst case scenario, the project doesn't happen because we can't get it to pencil. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other thoughts from the commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Otwell.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I have a question for staff. We received an email from Matthew Burns. Is it Matthew? There we go. Matthew Burns. And is that?
Yeah.
Oh, who was I'm sorry. You forwarded this to us. So who was the name of the senator? Pete Kohler. Yeah. Sorry, Matt.
That's okay.
I was wondering if you could just comment on specifically around his questions around access to his driveway that he currently doesn't. He has property. He has a reciprocal agreement, he says, with the neighbor, and he gets on in and out of his property through the properties in question, and what the impact would be on him of this rezoning if he would have to, what compliance requirements would be.
My understanding is that that would be a civil matter if he's got some kind of handshake agreement with his neighbor. Maybe see transportation. Do you have any ideas about that?
Morning, Margaret Tartalla, Transportation. I did not receive that email, so I'm not very familiar, but if they want to formalize a cross-access easement before property changes hands, that would be an option. And that's recording it on the deed for both plots. Does that answer your question?
I guess I'm just curious as to what the impact would be for him if he was not to receive some.
My understanding of the situation is that the driveway for Mr. Kohler's property at 824 Wake Forest is on his lot. And what he has been relying on his neighbor for is room to back and turn in the rear of the two houses, right? And I agree with transportation staff that without some sort of recorded easement, it is a handshake agreement and a point of conversation for Mr. Kohler with the current owner and the prospective owner.
And I'll just comment that we're completely willing to work with him. We've tried to meet with him. He lives in Sweden. We tried to meet with him on Zoom several times. So far, we haven't had that meeting, but we're committed to having it, and we'll work with him on that. And hopefully, we can keep what he has now.
While I have you up here, I wouldn't want to delay this case for it. I think it's more a symbol or a signal than anything else. But the condition against boarding houses, I think, sends the wrong signal for this kind of area. And if the project were to fall through and the rezoning were to stand, these are the kind of houses that could be boarding houses. So if it's possible to see that condition altered, it would be great. But I wouldn't want to hold this case up for it.
Yeah, that's a good point, and we'll make that adjustment.
Thank you, Commissioner Bennett.
Thank you. This condition prohibition probably isn't relevant given what is being thought about here, but it just always catches my attention when I see the prohibition on the social service use category. Why is that prohibited?
I think our attorney probably went with a condition for another thing, and it was just included, so we can take that out.
Okay.
Yeah, nothing on our side.
I am just curious, question for staff, what that means. Does that mean it can't be homeless shelter, or what is that intended to motion to?
So those types of uses require a special use permit. And I believe that this site is already within a supportive housing buffer. There are requirements in the UDO that require those special uses to be separated a certain distance. And this one, I believe, is within that radius. So I believe that that prohibition is related to there being a boarding house nearby currently.
Thank you. Other comments from the commissioners?
Just a clarification, they're limited uses and they have separation requirements. They don't require quasi-judicial review. They just have objective spacing standards, which is permitted under both the federal and the state statutes regulating family homes.
Thank you. Other comments? Commissioner Haber.
Yeah, so I want to thank the applicant for the diligence that they've done in planning for this. I live in the neighborhood. I'm very familiar with the site. I don't want to glance over the neighbor's concern who lives a couple doors down from me about the height. I had some concerns about that as well and spoke with the applicant about it. I'm comfortable with that 50-foot building setback and the 10-foot buffer yard. So I think they've gone a long way to mitigate those height issues. So I'm comfortable with that. I agree with Commissioner Raines about the materials, but I am, like I said, familiar with the applicant and their work, and I know the intent is to use quality materials there, but again, similar, I think, to some of our previous conversations about needing to pencil out sites. I think that you need to find a balance there. I would ask the applicant to consider, we've seen in some other cases, adding a condition which I think should be fairly benign about cutoff lighting for the neighbors. I'd hate to be the neighbor behind there sitting in my backyard and light shining into my backyard. So hopefully that's a benign request. I think it would be helpful for the neighborhood. And love the thought about the 3 affordable units since those are there. So hopefully, again, we can make that work. But understanding the complications on that, understand if we can't get in at this time. So.
Thank you. Other thoughts? Or would the applicant like to respond to the comment about cutoff lighting?
That's definitely our plan. I think it might be a requirement by the city anyway, but we definitely plan to do that and don't mind adding it in.
Thank you. Take care. Yes, Commissioner Bennett.
This is a frequent transit area, so the FTDO could be used. I just want to make sure that we note it every time there's an option that it could be used. I understand this is a small development and it may not work, and you are considering voluntarily offering affordable housing. We've just talked at the table a lot about the FTDO and its use or lack of being used. And if I want to make sure we're noting it each time it could be used and it's not, because if there is some sort of disincentive for developers to use it, I want staff to be aware and be able to.
I need to check, but because the NCOD is present here, I'm not sure of which controls.
Okay.
So let me just look at that real quick.
Okay.
Or Matthew may already know. He should know.
Ooh. Matthew's like, let me look. While Matthew is coming, I'll just say, we had a case at our last meeting with a small local developer who was voluntarily considering affordable housing, and we talked about our appreciation for that. So I want to say the same thing here. You know, it is nice when we have a local developer who is being thoughtful and sensitive to the community and is considering voluntarily offering affordable housing. So thank you for that.
Just to clarify, the NCOD controls in this case.
So when the NCOD controls, that means the FTDO would not be?
They can't really access the height bonus because of the height regulation of the current NCOD.
Okay,
So they would have to rezone to at least remove the NCOD.
got it. We really need a cheat sheet for that. That's just posted all the time.
Commissioner Haber.
Yeah, just for the record, since it came up, and I just missed it in my notes, I'm totally comfortable removing the NCOD in this location, so.
Thank you.
I'd be ready to move this along today, too, if anybody else would be willing to support the motion.
Well, I think that the applicant has asked to defer this case until their April 23rd meeting.
Okay.
So given the applicant's request to defer this case to the April 23rd meeting, I would like to make a motion to that effect, to allow the applicant to provide additional, to consider providing additional conditions, including those related to building materials with vinyl and EFS, removing conditions prohibiting boarding houses and social service uses, and looking at options related to townhouse development or townhome development as an alternative to the apartments in this area. Is there anything that I've missed on those list of amendments? Okay, then with that, I would like to, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion passes 7-0. Thank you very much. All right, moving on to our next item on our very full agenda. Item F5, rezoning case Z224 at Barwell Road. This case is to change approximately 14 acres from R4 to R10 with conditions. And we will turn to Robert Tate for a presentation from City Planning staff.
Good morning. Robert Tate with Planning and Development. This is rezoning request Z224 at 3400 Barwell Road. This is a request to rezone approximately 14 acres from R4 to R10 conditional use. Your deadline for action is June 8th. So zoning within the surrounding area is predominantly residential. This is an area of the site and the surrounding land uses, mostly moderate scale residential to the west and north, and some low scale residential to the east across Barrow Road. And here's a closer look at the site. It's a mostly wooded and underdeveloped site. Here are some ground images looking north on Barwell and south. The applicant has proposed a couple of conditions, one prohibiting some uses otherwise allowed in the zoning district, and another that would limit residential density on the site to no more than 8 units per acre. So here's a look at the change of entitlement. The big picture to look at is the increase in maximum units allowed. This site has a lower walk, transit, and bike score than the citywide average, an average transportation cost index, and a lower job proximity than the citywide average. This request does not include subsidized units, but it will add to the housing supply, would permit a variety of housing types, allow smaller units and smaller lots than the citywide average, and is in relative walking distance of transit. This site is not within the city's corporate limits today. Area residents are more likely to be racial minorities and or low income compared with the citywide average. So this request is consistent with the future land use map designation of moderate scale residential. And with that, it's consistent with the future land use map and also with the comprehensive plan. Here are a list of consistent policies that largely speak to development pattern and housing variety. There was one inconsistent policy that largely spoke to the known fire service considerations in the southeastern part of the planning jurisdiction. There are no outstanding issues, and your deadline, again, your deadline for action is June 8th. Upcoming meetings are April 23rd and May 14th. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Moving on to public comment for those in support. The applicant and those in favor will have a total of 10 minutes to speak. And please introduce yourself at the podium, even if you already have today.
Good morning again, members of Planning Commission. Worth Mills here on behalf of Marlowe and Moy LLC, who is the property owner and rezoning applicant. The rezoning would take the 14 acres of 3400 Barwell Road, rezone those from R4 to R10 conditional use, capping density at 8 units per acre. And the purpose of this rezoning is to extend and expand the planned townhouse project that Marlowe and Moy are currently under subdivision review for on 3500 Barwell Road, which is immediately south. So again, the site today, mostly wooded, most of the property on the western side of Barwell Road. That's the portion that we're going to be looking to develop. Nothing really changing with that small triangular piece on the eastern side. Street view here. So current zoning, it's R4, the 3500 Barwell Road property, which we rezoned, I think, back in 2021, is zoned RX3. That was before the city passed its missing middle text changes that increase density in your R10 and areas. So same product, but different zoning districts between 3500 and 3400. You've got Old Town to our west and to our north. That's zoned R10 conditional use as well. And then everything east of Barwell Road is zoned R4. This is a look at the current development plans that have been submitted to the city of Raleigh. Again, you've got the Old Town development to our west and to our north, and then immediately south is that 3500 Barwell Road project that Marlowe and Moy are currently have under subdivision review. You can see the latest copy of that pending subdivision plan here. Currently, we're showing one street stub into 3400 Barwell Road. This is likely to be reconfigured a little bit, assuming that we get a positive outcome on the 3400 Barwell Road rezoning. You might have a connection here rather than the one that's shown on the screen today, but you can see the townhouse product and the general layout at 3500 Barwell Road. Future land use map designates this property primarily as moderate scale residential. You've got the low scale residential on the east side, again, not doing anything with that, and a small portion public parks and open space on our western boundary line. That's for a future Raleigh Greenway, so we will be required to dedicate a 75-foot wide greenway easement for that portion from the stream bank. And again, the rezoning application that we've submitted, shown here on the screen, left-hand side, just designating that we're going to the R10 CU district. Right-hand side has our current zoning conditions, which prohibit boarding house, school, public, private, and outdoor sports and entertainment facility, and then capping density at 8 units per acre, which is within the range that you would normally see and is recommended by that moderate scale residential future land use map designation. This property is along that portion of Barwell Road that is currently being planned for the Barwell Road widening project. I've outlined the property boundaries here in blue, so you can see the north here kind of going to the upper right-hand side of the screen. The one thing that I wanted to point out on this slide is that the city has planned and has gotten the rights to construct a stormwater device on our property, kind of on the southeastern side of the area that we want to develop. That is for the that's to treat runoff from the increased impervious surface of the Barwell Road widening project. Marlowe and Moy will have a separate stormwater control facility on the western side, which is kind of the way the property slopes back towards Old Town. We spoke with the city attorney's office probably 6 to 9 months ago about the ability for us to access this site from Barwell Road. And they said that nothing that they're doing would prevent us from providing a driveway into the site from Barwell Road and could, potentially even kind of share that access point with the city. So nothing that the Barwell Road widening project is doing is interfering with our ability to access the site. It's only serving to make this, an easier street to navigate in the future. So the proposed rezoning is consistent with the future land use map. It's consistent with the comprehensive plan. It would add new homes and housing variety to this area that is primarily single-family detached. It would be an expansion of the pending townhouse project that Marlowe and Moy currently have under subdivision review, and it is reasonable and in the public interest. Happy to answer any questions that you have. We appreciate your time and respectfully ask that you provide a positive recommendation for this case. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who'd like to speak in support of this project? Seeing none, we'll move on to the opposition. Those opposed to this case will have a total of 10 minutes to speak. And seeing none, we can bring it back to the table for any questions or comments from commissioners. That's your reins.
Just a quick question for the applicant, or maybe even staff. Is there any intent to connect to the greenway or the stream system to the west? Or are there any future plans for public amenities along that stream?
So the greenway as shown on the future land use map right now is conceptual. There is no path. I don't think that we've looked at making that connection. I know that, let me see if I can get to this. You're most likely going to have your stormwater pond in this area. I'm not sure if that fully impedes connectivity to the Greenway Trail. I mean, we're open to kind of looking at that and seeing what the possibility for that is. I'm not even sure when that portion of the Greenway would be planned to be built. I'm sure that there would be some progress due to the Old Town development, but I don't have that answer for you today.
So to clarify, you'd be willing to look at whether, look at providing a condition that might allow for a path or an easement or something to the greenway in that area?
So we will for sure be dedicating a greenway easement along that portion of the planned greenway trail that touches and concerns our property. The question is our development going to, be 1 year, 10 years ahead of the greenway trail? And so are you building a connection to nothing essentially?
Right.
And so I think I would need to know more about the timing of what the build out of the greenway trail is before we would commit to any sort of connection, because again, it might not serve any purpose for quite some time.
Right.
Just throwing this out there, is there a way to add a condition that doesn't require you to do it now, but work with the city when they have their plans done so you can properly tie in at the best location on this property, or connecting with the adjacent property to the south?
Right, and
some
I'm just
method.
I'm trying to think of where that burden goes to, if it's so far in advance that now we're asking the more or less the HOA that's coming up with the funding for a connection there. So
Maybe just a level of thoughtfulness when building the retention pond to, think about that future condition in a way that would not be so cost prohibitive in the future, to just add a small path or trail.
Right.
That could access that area.
Totally.
Other comments from commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Bennett.
Thank you. Since either Commissioner Peeler or I are always the ones talking about affordable housing, I want to state why I'm okay with it not being included here. And it's because, in my opinion, this area has more than its fair share of subsidized housing. And there needs to be a good balance to have a healthy community. So I'm not harping on that on this case because I like to see affordable housing dispersed throughout the city. So thank you for everything else you've done here.
Absolutely, and just provide as much information as we can. The intent is to have these be a for-sale product, and that's typically kind of the path that the applicant takes when developing these communities. So we do expect, opportunities for home ownership here rather than just, renting in perpetuity.
That's great. I think that's important as well.
Thank you. Other comments from commissioners? Seeing none, I don't see any outstanding items we've discussed that would be changed before any of these conditions of the case, so I'd like to entertain a motion. Yes, Commissioner Bennett.
I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated April 9th, 2024, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment.
Thank you. Motion and a second. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion passes 7-0. Thank you, everyone. And moving on to item F6, rezoning case Z524 at Holden Road. This case is to change approximately 3.3 acres from R4 to R6. The applicant has also requested annexation into the Raleigh city limits. We will turn to Matthew Burns for a presentation from city planning staff.
Good morning, Planning Commission members. Matthew Burns with Planning and Development. This site is located about 500 feet west of Forestville Road and Holden Road intersection. It's in northeast Raleigh, fairly close to Wake Crossroads. As you mentioned, the applicants requested annexation as well, and your deadline for action is June 8th. Zoning in the area is predominantly residential. Some nearby uses, or I guess nearby neighborhoods, include Forestville Farms and Wheatley, and there's also Harris Creek Elementary kind of across Forestville Road to the east of the site. There is an approved preliminary subdivision plan for a site that's adjacent to the west, which is proposing about 110 lots, conventional single-family subdivision. Here are some views of the site as it exists now. There's one manufactured home on site, as well as at least one accessory structure in the rear. So this is a request for a general use district, so no zoning conditions are proposed. And the request would increase residential entitlement, and setbacks would be slightly less restrictive in R6 compared to R4. The site's got a lower walk score, transit score, bike score, and lower access to jobs than average. I'll note that although it has average transportation costs, the area is not served by municipal or regional transit. The request would add to the housing supply. It does not include subsidized units, permits a variety of housing types, smaller lots than average, and again, it's not served by municipal or regional transit. Residents are more likely to be racial minorities and less likely to be low income compared to city average. And the cost of rent increased 17% between 2020 and 2022. The requested R6 is consistent with low-scale residential, and there's no urban form guidance for this site. The request is consistent with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map. And consistent policies are related to zoning of annexed lands, zoning for housing, and compact development. And inconsistent policies are related to infrastructure. The site does not meet the National Fire Protection Association standards for the deployment of an initial full alarm assignment, which has an 8-minute or less travel time at any fire suppression incident. There are no outstanding issues, and your deadline for action is June 8th. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you very much. We'll now open the public comment for those in support. The applicant and those in favor have a total of 10 minutes to speak. And please introduce yourself at the podium.
Thank you, Commissioners. I'm a realtor by profession, and I help a lot of people, first-time home buyers. And this is actually giving us an opportunity to find homes for people with low down payments and bring them in the price point where they could actually buy townhomes in what we are planning to build.
Thank you very much. Any other presentation today? Okay. Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak in support of this project? Then seeing none, we'll move on to the opposition. Those opposed to this case will have a total of 10 minutes to speak. And seeing none, we can bring it back to the table for any discussion or questions from commissioners. Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion.
I move to approve to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated April 9th, 2024, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment.
Thank you. Motion to a second?
Second.
Any further discussion or debates on the merits? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? That motion passes 7-0. Thank you very much. And moving to item F7, TC 423, a text change related to digital billboards. This is a text change authorized by council to permit digital billboards, a current prohibited type of off-premise outdoor advertising sign. This item is appearing on our regular meeting agenda because council has requested feedback on this item from the full commission. And we will turn to Keegan McDonald for a presentation from the city.
All right, thank you. Keegan McDonald, I'm with Planning and Development. I will be presenting this item, which is text change TC 423. We've titled Digital Billboards. So through this presentation, I'm going to walk through a little bit of the history about how billboards have been regulated, then provide an overview of potential impacts associated with billboards, both digital and otherwise. Also provide a summary of our existing regulations and how they compare to some proposed changes that were brought forth by members of the billboard and outdoor advertising industry, and also some additional considerations and options, including the considerations that were raised by the City Council when we presented to them on March 19th. So this presentation is almost identical, except for at the end, there'll be a list of those considerations that the council provided us with. And as the chair mentioned, I think the intent of the council is to get some more concrete feedback so that we can proceed with drafting an ordinance if that's the desire of the Planning Commission. So I'll present some options as well at the very end of the presentation. A little bit of background on billboards in general. So the main distinction here is between on-premise versus off-premise signage. Most of the signage you see throughout the city is considered on-premise, meaning it's advertising or displaying messages for a business or attraction or entity on the same lot of record. Outdoor advertising has been viewed not only in Raleigh but elsewhere throughout the country as a separate and distinct use of primarily public thoroughfares, private property but adjacent to public thoroughfares, and therefore it's regulated differently than on-premise signage, typically more restrictive like it is in Raleigh. So the existing regulations that we have in our code have largely been unchanged since the 1980s. There's been challenges within the courts, but the existing regulations have been upheld. So with digital billboards, there are specific impacts that have been cited. I will note that these are somewhat subjective and contested, but we wanted to provide you with an overview of those that have been cited through different studies, through public input, et cetera. So there's, of course, visual and aesthetic impacts from the signage, depending on the size, location, messages that might be displayed. There is potential concern and ongoing study and debate related to traffic safety and distracted driving. And there's some materials that were provided in your in board docs for you all to review. The impacts on residential neighborhoods, property values, potential environmental and light pollution associated particularly with digital billboards, depending on their brightness and how they may impact the immediate vicinity. Future costs and liabilities to impose potential new regulations on billboards, so whether or not those would render billboards non-conforming. And last, rules that prevent overconcentration or improper placement. So again, we have a fair amount of regulatory structure within our code today. Summary of how they are regulated. So digital billboards as a class are prohibited, meaning the actual digital or changeable copy nature of billboards today is prohibited. So the ones that you see are static, meaning image does not change unless they're manually resurfaced. They're limited to specific zoning districts, primarily industrial and then campus and PD. And then there are separation requirements both from other off-premise signs or billboards and then from zoning districts that permit residential uses. Size is also limited depending on the size of the roadway that it's adjacent to. Height is limited, and again, emphasizing changeable copy is prohibited. Here is a map of existing billboard locations provided to us by some folks involved in the industry that we've been speaking with since this text change was authorized. I will note that this doesn't encompass every single billboard, but it is the vast majority. And you can see that they're concentrated along a few specific corridors. This table is also included in your staff report, so apologies for the small text, but hopefully it's legible here in your report. Just wanting to compare the current regulations against, again, what we've received from the folks representing the billboard industry. So main differences I'll highlight: digital billboards would be permitted as they propose. There would also be the addition of the CX and DX zoning districts and specific corridors that they'd want to see the billboards viewable from, and that's not something that's specifically really called out in our regulations. Separation requirements, there would still be that 1,000-foot separation from between static signs, but then a mile separation between digital. Other separation requirements would change the separation that we have today, which is related to any district that permits dwellings to 500 feet from local or national historic districts, and then 200 feet from residential zoning districts on the same side of the street. Size would be limited to no increase over the existing sign that it may be replacing, or 672 square feet, whichever is less. So obviously a new site would be permitted to be quite, larger under this proposal. Height would also be increased by 10 feet to a maximum of 40 feet. And then changeable copy, because of that digital nature, would be permitted, but with some limitations on special effects, transitions, animations, and then the change rate, meaning how quickly or how long a message has to be displayed before it could change to another message. And then there's some brightness limitations on those digital billboards as well. We did our best to conduct an analysis of potentially eligible parcels that could be opened up through the proposal. And I want to caveat this heavily by saying there's a few things that we couldn't account for. So this accounts primarily for the zoning districts that it would be permissible in, and then subtracting out the local and historic districts. It doesn't account for residential districts that would be on the same side of the street. It was difficult for us to manage. And then also the street classification based on the GIS data we had was difficult for us to account for. Also doesn't account for existing signage because again, that data is limited on our part. But we did just want to show from this is really more from a zoning classification as opposed to those separations, if that's an easy way to think about it. It doesn't mean that 2,000 properties could place, you could place a billboard on all 2,000. It just means that that's the potential, when looking at the zoning piece. So there were some peer jurisdictions that we evaluated for how they regulate signage, and so common themes we saw: bulk, meaning overall size; quantity. Some jurisdictions choose to impose a citywide cap or a cap and trade system where you would remove existing non-digital signs to erect new digital signs in some ratio, perhaps 1-to-1 or some other ratio at the jurisdiction's choosing. Separation, like we have today, between signs themselves, between signs and residential districts, and then also historic districts. Change sequence and transition times, as I noted in that table, and then overall brightness. Some other considerations, again, mention this, but reduction or cap on the total number of off-premise signs is something that has been discussed. The council also, at authorization, and then again on the 19th, like I'll cover in a few slides, made a statement that they'd like to see some type of public benefit if this was to be permitted, meaning some type of public exemption or reservation for public messaging or governmental messaging to occur within these digital billboards. Could be meetings, emergency information, et cetera, but trying to provide some type of public resource through these signs, excuse me. And then again, success and effectiveness of current regulations, subjective, of course, but they've been in place for quite some time. I think folks, based on that existing map and also your experience driving throughout the city, you can kind of see where they've been concentrated. Just wanting to point out that that may weigh into the decision making, whether or not how we're regulating them today spatially and based on zoning districts is appropriate, or if it should be loosened or tightened. So I'm going to just go through some of the city council feedback, kind of touching on, I think, the most commonly cited comments that were provided to staff at that time. So I think there was general concern about creating a more open system or a more open framework for signs to be located throughout the city, whether it be based on expanding the zoning districts, the viewing corridors, the decreasing any spacing between residential districts. There also seemed to be general support for capping in some way the number of signs, so whether that be signs total, static, digital, et cetera, but general support for a cap. Also want to note that the city is limited due to protections under the First Amendment from regulating the content of signage. So by and large, a sign that exists could display messages or advertising that may be undesirable depending on the viewer. So I think I'd let the city attorney speak to that more if you have questions, but generally speaking, content is difficult for us to regulate with any sign. Also, just generally thinking about how signs, again, have been concentrated today throughout the city. I think that was of concern that I think they noticed based on the existing billboard map that there are specific corridors where there's a lot of signage, right? And that they're not perhaps as dispersed as in a way to make it a little bit more equitable. And I use that in the sense of creating some more, I guess, parity between different neighborhoods and parts of the city. There's a lot of signage in a few places and relatively little or none in other places throughout the city, and whether those impacts fall on different groups or demographics disproportionately. And then moving to the next set, they again supported retaining a lot of the existing limitations we have related to height and size and spacing. Wanted us to engage at some point with those who are not in the sign industry. Typically, our engagement with text changes, as you all are probably aware, we draft an item based on the specific direction we receive from council, and then we post it on our public engagement portal, and then proceed through the review process with the Planning Commission and then City Council. We have received some email traffic from folks who are either concerned or in opposition, but we haven't had there's not a concentrated group, if you will, or representative group that we've engaged with, but we have received some feedback from different community members who are potentially opposed or have concerns. And the cap and trade kind of system is also called out here. And then again, allowances for them to display messages with a public benefit. So some examples given: amber alerts, important events, road closures, et cetera. As far as the text change itself, we wanted to provide a few options, and this doesn't get to every single permutation, but these are some of the kind of higher level options that we've discussed. So there could be no change, of course, keep the existing off-premise signage regulations as they are, not permitting digital. There could be an allowance to keep the existing regulatory framework in terms of all the dimensional standards, the spacing, the districts, but to permit digital. And as part of that, potentially require removal of existing signs as a prerequisite for every digital sign. So again, a cap and trade model. 3 would be to accept the proposal from the industry, whether part or in whole. And then the 4th part is really about the part. So there could be interest in maybe creating flexibility with some of the standards, but not all of them. And there's obviously a number of those listed. So today we are just really seeking perhaps more specific feedback, as I mentioned, if there is consensus among the group to direct us to begin drafting. We really just received that list of concerns from the council, but they didn't say for sure, we want to go in one specific direction or the other. I think they wanted to provide that feedback to the Planning Commission in the hopes that, again, this group could provide us with some more specific direction if we are to draft an ordinance for review.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, I had
Yes,
one other
please.
comment. I just want to let you know that there are some folks from the industry in the room today, if that's of any interest to the Planning Commission. Obviously, defer to you all, but they are present.
Thank you very much. And my next question procedurally is for our staff. Since it's on our regular agenda, do we open up a public hearing on this item, or do we treat it similarly to in text change committee?
It's not a hearing, it's not been noticed or anything like that, so there's no obligation to take public comment. Obviously, you're always free to take public comment. This is just a sort of more than a courtesy, because I think council gave staff guidance to do this, but to get some input from the Planning Commission on their thoughts about this type of text change. But if you want to allow members of the public to speak, that's always within your prerogative.
Thank you. Thank you, that's helpful. Then, by show of hands, are there any members of the public here who would like to speak on this topic? Is that 2 people? Okay, in that case, I would like to provide 6 minutes of public comment and trying to make sure that we allot the appropriate amount of time to each of the 2 people who wants to reply. If you'd please come up to the podium and introduce yourself. I said 6 in the interest of time today so that we can get a good discussion.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Commissioners. I'm Christopher Hollis with CS Hollis and Associates. In the interest of time, we'll be very short. We have been working with staff and with council for quite some time on expanding digital off-premise signs. We are certainly in agreement with the public use. We are certainly been bringing forth ideas around the spacing, and look forward to continue to work with staff to get an ordinance that we believe we can move forward. We recognize that digital signs are all around Raleigh, in every direction. And some of our neighboring cities of light that we've provided to staff with that have much more open ordinances than what we're actually looking for here in Raleigh, but happy to continue to work with staff as this moves forward. We also have members from an outdoor advertising company, if there's any technical questions, that would be able to answer those more specifically. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hollis. We'd have our next speaker.
this has got to go better than my day so far. I drove here from Franklin County and parked up here and didn't have my billfold. But fortunately, the guy gave me a pass. Then I go down here, take a break, and in the bathroom, the door is locked.
Oh, no.
It broke. Have you ever seen an 80-year-old man climb out from under one of those?
No.
Fortunately, it was clean. But,
Okay.
my name's Dewey Botts.
Thank you for coming down and for
Thank
your
you.
patience throughout these last couple hours to get to speak.
Thank you. My name's Dewey Botts. 25 years ago, I lived at 608 Ortega Road in Raleigh, next to Douglas Elementary School. And for what it's worth, I was president of Douglas PTA, Sanderson PTA, and Carroll, and vice president of Wake County PTA. We had Sanderson had the second largest population in the state. But I'm not representing officially Scenic North Carolina. I am on the board, and I just happened to wake up this morning and realize, I had read some of where this had gotten, and it shocked me that it had as much discussion as it did with the city council, and it concerned me. So I jumped in the car and came on. I serve on the Scenic North Carolina board with Dale McNeil, Reich Longest, Bill Johnson used to be with DOT, and Lois Nixon, some people that have fought this issue for years. About 40 years ago, I was chair of Vistas Unlimited. This was a group of 300 volunteers in Raleigh that worked their buns off on this issue with the council, Mayor Upchurch, I think it was then, and then the next Smead York mayor. But fortunately, Tom McCormick put in to move the billboards out. We got essentially a ban on billboards. He put in a 5 or 7 year period that they could make enough money that we could come in and take them down. But in most of the work with Scenic North Carolina, we work with the General Assembly on state issues, and this comes up every year. Every time the General Assembly is in town, the industry wants to do something different out there, change some wordage, and it's been, I won't use the word, it's been tough. For that effort, for what it's worth, I received the second individual Sir Walter Raleigh Award. Valley Henderson was the only one that had received it before. She started the garden club over in Oakwood. And I served on the Appearance Commission here for 6 years after that, appointed to it. The billboard company sued the findings and took it to the Supreme Court, and they would not hear the court. Avery Upchurch, as I said, was mayor then. Norma Burns was on the council. Tom McCormick was the city attorney. And the digital billboards for Raleigh, North Carolina, it seems like a no-brainer to me. I mean, all you'd have to do is see the pictures I've taken over there when the News and Observer would come to me in the rural area of Franklin County of the awards that this city has received nationally for that. This is a city of oaks. This is not the city of billboards or digital billboards. As far as a safety analysis, I read what I think staff had gotten, and I don't know who could have written that thing. It's hard to find anything in there, and they never reached a conclusion about the safety. Now, you tell me that riding down the road and a billboard out there, that's not some safety issue. That's in a car. But you tell me riding down the road with a digital billboard out there that it's not a safety issue. Now, you tell me that riding through the roads on a bicycle in Raleigh that they're not an issue. I can tell you that's ridiculous. As I said, it's a no-brainer. I'll conclude with saying where I could see digital billboards, just sort of burn it in your brain. One is Las Vegas. The other is that place going into South Carolina, south of the border. And the other thing I would say in conclusion is give much energy at all to this thing would be a slap in the face of those 300 volunteers that are out there and to staffs, both then and now. It would be utterly ridiculous to do that.
Thank you very much, sir.
Any questions?
If we have those, we might call you back up to the podium
Okay,
for them.
thank
but
you very much.
Thank you very much for driving down here.
But you can get your parking validated out here, by the way. Yeah, you don't have to pay for it, so I just
It's
wanted to-
immediately outside
Yeah.
these conference room doors.
Oh, okay.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, thank you. Okay. And just double checking, are there any other members of the public who wanted to speak on this, who didn't get an opportunity? And seeing none, we will bring this back to the table for initial thoughts from the commission. And I guess I'll just start with a procedural question from staff. Reading the report, so council is requesting the planning commission use feedback that they have provided to develop a specific ordinance for this, or?
Yeah, that's my understanding. I think they only, again, provided those high-level considerations or concerns, but they've not instructed us on specifics related to any potential ordinance. So I think the goal is to hopefully have those specifics worked out through the Planning Commission. Of course, there could be a recommendation for no change. That wouldn't require an ordinance, but I think broadly, if there is a desire to change something, they're hoping for those specifics to be worked out. I don't know if Bynum or David had any other comment, but.
Well, I was just going to say, how is this different from usual, right? Because I think that sort of explains what the council's getting at. So you always, through your text change committee and these meetings, have the opportunity to review text changes once they have been drafted. And in this instance, council said to staff, before you draft, ask the planning commission for their input earlier, right? So you always get one bite of the apple, and they said, give the planning commission 2 bites this time.
Okay.
Right? So that you have some input before it goes in the portal for public comment. Right, you could say no change, and it wouldn't go in the portal. And when it wouldn't go in the portal, and you would say to council, well, our recommendation is you don't make a text change. So just giving you that extra just giving you an additional opportunity to participate in the process of evaluating this text change.
Thank you. That's helpful. With that clarification, initial thoughts from the commissioners. Yes, Commissioner Otwell.
Thank you, Chair Miller. I had some questions for staff. Could you give us a little bit more context about the current state of billboards? So we've heard that there was the big push to get billboards out, but we still have a great number of them. So what decided what stayed and what left? And I understand we don't have a cap, so the current number of billboards is functionally limited by the zoning areas that it could be in? Those are the two questions I was hoping for clarification
I can respond to
on.
the second, and I might defer to city attorney office to respond to the first, just because they might have more of the legal background. You're correct that we don't have a hard cap, but we have a practical constraint based on where the zoning districts where they're permitted, and then also the spacing standards. So that effectively limits suitable sites where you could locate an off-premise sign, but there's not a strict cap as of today.
Quick follow-up question before you take my next part. In the proposed policy section of the table, it has the intended to be viewing from portions. Is that something that staff could regulate through policy, or is that just something that this is to let us know the intent of the policy?
I think there's some possibility that there could be a locational standard based upon established thoroughfares. At least from a zoning perspective, I think legally, I would defer to the attorney's office if there's any concern there with it being differentiated between zoning districts, but based on a specific street. There's some regulations that work that way in the UDO today, but I would defer to the city attorney's office to make sure there's legality there.
To get back to your first question, when the billboard or outside advertising off-premise sign, however you want to call it, when the outdoor advertising ordinance was drafted and approved in the late 80s, I want to say, or mid to late 80s, it had these spacing requirements. And there's certain corridors we are limited in how we can regulate. And so if a billboard was outside that corridor and it didn't meet the code, okay, so there were spacing issues, there were size issues, because the largest billboard we allow is 150 square feet under the code. And so if you were outside a protected corridor where we could not impose a moratorium, or require removal, they put in a 5.5-year amortization period to allow the owners of the billboard to recover reasonable return on their investment, okay? And that's what went to court over those takings claims and so forth. And the ordinance was upheld. But that's why we still have billboards. It wasn't a prohibition to billboards across the city. It said, okay, let's get them under control. Let's regulate the size. Let's regulate the locations, all of which are proper things to regulate throughout the First Amendment jurisprudence that's out there. And so that's why there's still billboards. And that's why there may still be some that are larger than 150. But that was why some had to be removed.
The limited distribution is due to the zoning regulations about where they
Yes.
can go. So if
Yeah,
we were to
rough-
rezone an area,
Yeah,
a billboard could show
yeah.
up. Okay.
Because it's not only zoning, it's a spacing, and, you got to meet all those requirements. And so that is right now how sort of it's unofficially capped, as Keegan alluded to.
Thank you, Commissioner Bennett.
Thank you. Keegan, could you bring the map back up that shows the current locations of, yeah. So my concern is, it's the South and East Raleigh. Everything goes in South and East Raleigh. My concern is if we expand where they can go through the zonings, we're still going to see a concentration in South and East Raleigh. It's kind of like the affordable housing location policy. We show where it can go, it goes in South and East Raleigh. I have concerns about safety, despite what, the literature may say. I do have concerns about safety. I have concerns about it being concentrated in South and East Raleigh. I could support the billboards. You had up the option number 2, that was essentially just swapping out what we have for the digital ones. That's not really increasing where they can go. Yeah, keeping the regulatory framework, but allowing digital billboards and requiring the removal of existing signs. I could live with that, even though it still keeps them concentrated in South and East Raleigh. I'm just nervous about opening it up to other places where they could go through the zoning. And that's primarily because of the light pollution, the potential for traffic safety issues. I mean, people can hack into these things. I'm not very techie, but I know people can hack into billboards and do all sorts of things. And people have even hacked into NCDOT's boards and put up offensive messages. So those are my comments. I'm concerned about, I guess, the geographic distribution of the billboards, even if we were to say, well, they can go along these other areas. And so I would be okay with 1 or 2, but none of the others.
Thank you. And I think this might warrant a larger discussion, so perhaps holding to our next meeting. But before we do that, I do want to take a quick poll from the commission on who here is generally in favor of billboards in the city, thinking that they provide a public benefit versus fewer billboards in the city, that would provide more of a public benefit. So I guess I need, yes?
I'm not sure I have enough information at this time to be able to respond to that. I mean, I've got a lot of questions, and one of them is, should this go to text change committee where we can spend some time thinking about the consequences of what we're deciding to do here? I'm curious where this originated. Did the allowance come from city council to be able to provide additional billboards? Is this from an applicant that brought the text change forward? Okay.
Yes.
I'm not sure I have enough information at this point. I'm
Right,
sorry.
and so, but procedurally, they want us to not send it to committee, to instead discuss it, the input from the full planning commission.
I don't know if there's a prohibition to send it to the committee. They want planning commission's input in drafting. And so I think if you put it into committee and the committee did some of the heavy lifting and reported back to council or back to the full planning commission before, staff cuts loose on drafting the
Yeah, so you have a couple
document.
options. It could go to, Transportation Committee. I don't know that I think that's the right choice. It could go to the Text Change Committee, could go to Committee of the Whole, or you could keep it here at the table for ongoing discussion. Those are your three, and those are usual options for items that you could discuss. They could go to a committee or the Committee of the Whole, or stay at the table.
Yeah, sorry, Commissioner Bennett.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I'd support it going to text change committee where we could really dig into it. And, I mean, other commissioners are welcome to come to the committee meeting so you could still get your questions asked and comments provided at that point. But then we can really dig into it and talk about it and ask questions of the industry representatives and the community. Because like Commissioner O'Haver, it's a lot of information. And so I really want to make sure I understand it all.
I was going to make a different suggestion, maybe put it in the Committee of the Whole so we have full commission input from different perspectives, and then we can get into the weeds.
That's what I was going to ask sort of fellow commissioners. Text change, there's only a few people looking at that. If we went to Committee of the Whole, it'd be a broader review, but it might take longer. So I
Right.
wasn't sure what the
Yeah.
will of the fellow commissioners
How is our
were, but-
agenda for
That's
each
what
of
I
those
would
items?
ask. What's coming up on Committee of the Whole? We have items there sometimes that we discuss for many.
Right, so your upcoming April 25 Committee of the Whole meeting, which is, 2 weeks from Thursday, is, there are two items there. There's a comprehensive plan amendment and a rezoning. They're both related to parcels on Blue Run Lane, which is on the east side of Raleigh, up around 540. So those two items kind of go together, and they're on that agenda. I would defer to Keegan about what's on the Text Change Committee agenda, because I feel like we have a lot going on there right now. And then your next meeting, the 23rd, you have some old business from today, but I don't know that I feel like there's probably room there.
That there is room on a regular planning commission meeting in 2 weeks.
Yeah, so you have, it looks like 5 new items and an old item on the 23rd.
And if we were to hear it at our regular meeting on the 23rd, would there be time to send it to the April 25th Committee of the Whole meeting? I don't think there would, right?
I'm sorry.
If we hear it at our April 23rd regular meeting, would there still be time to defer it to our April 25th Committee of the Whole meeting?
No.
No.
Because we publish the agendas for both meetings the Thursday prior.
Gotcha. So then it would instead be deferred to our May Committee of the Whole meeting.
Could go there, or could go to a regular meeting, one of your regular meetings in May.
Gotcha.
So just my current opinion is I'd hate to take it to another meeting and then also send it to Cal. I mean, generally my instincts is I'm not in favor of expanding it, but I don't have enough information to feel comfortable making a decision on how I would vote on that. So I feel like with a little bit more information and time, personally, I would have enough information for me to feel comfortable about where I stood on the issues.
Thank you. So based on the full agendas of the Committee of the Whole and the Text Change Committee this month, and the fact that we have room on our committee, on our regular meeting on the 23rd to hear this item. Is there any objection to hearing this at that time?
I support it going to committee. I think this requires more of an informal kind of discussion and not a formal planning commission discussion. I think at the committee meetings, members of the public can speak. I don't know. I just support it going to committee because it's not I support it going to committee.
Thank you.
And yeah, we do have those items on our upcoming text change committee, but a couple of them are in effect taken care of. Staff just needed to make some revisions based on our feedback so we could report them out. Is that correct?
So there are two items at Text Change Committee in April, which is next Wednesday. There is the omnibus list, the 2023 omnibus list, and then there is a companion package, which is the Stormwater Design Manual update. So my estimation is maybe one of those could get out of committee next week, but perhaps not both, just given the length. So that
It doesn't really matter to me if it goes to text change or committee of the whole, as long as we can actually discuss it. But I support, my preference is for it to go to a committee.
I second that opinion, and I don't think we have a deadline for action, do we?
Or guidance from council on this
No.
early bite at the apple? No.
No, it's not drafted yet. We're trying to get planning commission's input on what to draft and put through the text change process. Even if you guys all say number one, a text change has been authorized by council. And so we'll have to follow up with council on that.
Thank you. So it sounds like maybe we might be able to hear this at the committee of the whole on the 25th. So are there any objections to moving this to the committee of the whole on the 25th?
No, I think Commissioner Bennett's comments are well placed, and I agree with those.
Great, okay. Then without objection, I believe, we'll remove this item to the committee of the whole meeting on April 25th. Thank you all very much. Moving on to report of the members. First is the report, I'm sorry, the minutes. Yes, we have a batch of minutes. Are there any comments or questions to the minutes? A comment from Commissioner Bennett?
Yes. On page 7, under Z4623, both of the votes were 4-4, but the language says they were unanimous. So just need to fix that.
Okay, she's
And-
making that good catch.
Then on page 9, case Z324, there was I'm trying to go down to it as I'm talking, but it was the discussion about why we didn't require the applicant to include the affordable housing. Yeah, I thought we needed to expand on that just a little bit because council now is asking a lot more questions about why we did the things we did or didn't do the things we did. And so it just says, here it is. There was discussion regarding the applicant being willing to add affordable units. And I think the discussion was, I'm happy to type it up and send it to everybody for their approval, but it was more around he was voluntarily offering to include affordable housing, and the general consensus on the Planning Commission was that we weren't going to require him to include it in a condition. We appreciated that he was voluntarily offering it, but we weren't going to require it of him because we hadn't been requiring it of larger private developers. So if you got that, Shanita, great. If you want me to type it up, I can type it up and send it to you and copy everybody so you can see it and make sure you're fine with the language. But I just wanted to make sure because council does ask a lot of questions, which is great. I mean, I'm glad to
Yes.
see that they're asking questions and they want to know more about our discussion.
Thank you. Any other comments to the minutes? Great. Then with those, would anyone like to make a motion to approve the minutes with those changes?
I'll move to approve the minutes with the requested changes.
Second.
All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion passes 7-0. Thank you. Moving on to committee reports. Thank you, everyone, for your efficiency today and letting everyone be heard on this very full agenda. I will defer to the others on the committee meetings, but I wanted to address council at their last 2 meetings. I'd be remiss if I don't mention it, has publicly admonished us not for both attendance issues and then also not making recommendations or making no recommendations on some critical cases. I believe Bynum's going to speak to the first item, but on the second item, I just wanted to encourage everyone. Sometimes there are legitimate and good reasons to not make a recommendation if we need more information, if someone is proposing to make a change, those kind of things. But for those of us that feel that we should put things to a vote, I just wanted to encourage all of us, including myself in the future, to be able to speak up about it in those circumstances. And where it is appropriate to have a no vote recommendation, I'm happy to defend that and support that to council as well. So not saying that in all cases no recommendation is appropriate, but sometimes it is, and just consider that in the future. Thank you. Moving down the line. Oh.
I just would add about the attendance. Council has the nature of your dynamic with council that Chair Miller and I stand up at every meeting and talk about what happened at your last meeting means that council knows when you don't meet. No other board gets that kind of attention to lack of quorum, right? But they noticed that you didn't meet once in February and they noticed that you didn't meet once in March. And that is, I think the nature of your work is also different from most boards and commissions in that you are part of the customer service process for the city in terms of giving applicants their fair day on the stage and discussion, right? You are facilitating a really important part of some key development transactions for the city, whether you support them or not, right? You have an objective part of the process. So, one, please come to the meetings. I know it is a big commitment for a volunteer board. We basically ask you to meet 4 times a month, right? We ask you to come to 2 of these meetings and a committee of the whole meeting and also a subcommittee meeting. It is a lot, and there will be times when you are not here. And if you cannot be here, you really have to let us know in advance so that, if you know today that you won't be here at the next meeting, Chair Miller and I need to know because we can make adjustments in advance. We can make other arrangements. But, when we cancel a meeting on Friday before the Tuesday, that is a big disservice to the public in terms of, we mail hundreds of letters and post dozens of signs to get people to come to your meetings and listen to you. So we really need to know about that. So council has asked for an attendance report for the past 2 years. We have been working with the clerk's office to gather that information, provide to the council. I don't know exactly what form that will take. If you're interested in your rate of attendance, I would be happy to review that with you. But just really, really need to know when you will not be here well in advance so that we can plan accordingly, please.
Thank you. And moving down the line.
Thanks, Chair Miller. As we discussed, the next committee of the whole meeting is on April 25th. And we have likely, I guess, I don't know, we'll figure out what happens with the billboards. But we have, as Bynum mentioned, a CP and a rezoning for Blue Run Lane. So just speaking of attendance, just to kind of get a head count for today, who can show up for the April 25th meeting? 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we'll.
I possibly can make it, so if you need me to make quorum, just let me know. I need to move some stuff around on my calendar, but I might be able to accommodate that. But right now, I've got a conflict.
Okay.
I think it's just
5, 6.
I'm going to try to rearrange my schedule to be here on the 25th. I understand that we've got a lot going on, so I'm trying to make sure I can be here.
Thank you. So if here's we have quorum, then I'll check in a week prior. Thanks.
Thank you.
Can I just make a request while we're talking about meeting schedules? This is a volunteer board. We've been here since 9. It's almost 12:30. I know a lot of us have day jobs as well that we have to rearrange schedules to get to, so we can make these meetings more concise. When we do meet, I think that would be helpful for quorum for a lot of people as well.
Heard and supported, yes. Moving down the line.
Text Change Committee will meet April 17th. That is a week from tomorrow at 4. We have, looks like 3 agenda items, and we will be expecting to report out a couple of those items at our next Planning Commission meeting. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Commissioner Otwell.
Oh, wait, no,
Yes.
no, sorry. Following in Commissioner Rain's footsteps, who will be able to attend April 17th? That's Peeler, O'Haver, Rains, myself. Okay, we have quorum. Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. And down the line.
I just got reappointed by council, so y'all are stuck with me for another 2 years. Thank you.
Congratulations.
And I see that Commissioner Fox is not here, so I think we have a strategic planning meeting. No? Is that?
She's asked that we meet in May, that you meet next in May.
Excellent. Thank you. That's all.
I'm still listed as a member of Strategic Planning up here. I don't think I'm a member of Strategic Planning. Don't report me absent.
Thank you. I don't have anything to report. Thank you.
Just for the record, I understand council's concerns, but I think staff has done a great job. I feel like we've been very efficient in making recommendations on things. I think Chair Miller's done a great job. I think all the commissioners have, Vice Chair Rains. And so understand council's admonishment, but I think it's a little harsh, quite frankly, because I feel like when we vote something out without a recommendation, it's not just willy-nilly. We have lots of conversation around it. So anyways, I just want to say kudos to staff and to the other members on the commission. I think we don't take making no recommendation lightly, and I think we've done a really good job, even with some missed meetings, getting through everything, being efficient. So I just wanted to make comment for the record on that.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I'm going to continue to address that issue with council directly as well about the no recommendations. Commissioner McCrim? Thank you.
I'm good to go.
Any other comments for the good of the order? And I would like to thank everyone. I know we are all volunteers here, and it is a very demanding meeting schedule. And thank you to everybody who does attend, everyone attends. And so thank you to everyone for your service. Continued moving forward. Sure. And just a head count for the regular Planning Commission meeting on the 23rd. All those that can attend. Tuesday, the 23rd.
Tuesday, the 23rd is the next planning commission meeting. The 25th is the committee of the whole.
That's right.
So that week you have 2 meetings.
Yep.
Yes. All those who can attend by show of hands, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That is a quorum. Yep. Potentially 7. Okay. Yep. And then we can still reach out to Commissioners Peeler and Fox. Yep. All right. Anything else for the good of the order?
Yeah.
Yes.
I just was going to say,
sorry.
in the interest of meeting length, we did not put the station area planning update item on the agenda today. It is in my report. Please let me know if you have questions about that. And then a little bit of a preview. I am working with the Attorney's Office and others to evaluate some changes to process. I'll provide more written information in a forthcoming report, but it would likely change the timing of the delivery of your report to council. So right now, you meet today, and then the agenda for council's next meeting is published on Thursday. And that turnaround is really tough for staff, and so we're looking at an adjustment there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.